I, I was instructed to tap on the mic before I get started. I did what I was told. All right, this is a little bit of a rowdy crowd, so I'm going to have to ask you all to just like calm down here a little bit. Listen, first and foremost, we have some virtual people, so I want to say hello to the virtual crowd. I believe it's that camera over there. So I hope, are they online? Do we have we're good to go? Okay. Welcome, virtual cloud. First of all, Scott, his flight was delayed, so unfortunately, you've got me to kick things off today. It's big shoes to fill, but I'm going to do my best. I was given a script. I cannot guarantee that I will stick with it. I'm Ralph Exton. I'm the executive director of the Water Environment Federation. Absolutely thrilled to be here, and in particular with this group. I came down this morning from Philadelphia and I brought the rain. So you can either thank me because this is the theme of today, is stormwater, or you can be upset with me because you're now. I like to start everything I do telling my water story, and I've told it so many times, but I'm going to tell one today that I haven't told it because this is stormwater. So I'm going to tell a stormwater story instead of a general water story, and I hope it all. Ones that will appreciate it the most around for a long time. The reason is because when I started my career many, many years ago, I found out one day that not only was I responsible for the water systems at an industrial facility, I was also the one responsible when something happened when it rained. And we were having some problems with some stormwater runoff, and now it became my problem. And I didn't know anything about stormwater. I'm a mechanical engineer by education, but was thrown into the water world. So what I did was I was like, I got to learn about stormwater. So I went to my alma mater and said, what do you got with stormwater? And they said, well, we have this postgraduate class. It's about a week-long class, and it's called Computational Methods in Stormwater Management. You heard of it? Anybody? Now I'm going to date myself a little bit. Fortran, yes. Fortran, yeah. That was really something, but it was great, honestly. A week long, lots of details about stormwater, but it gave me an incredible appreciation for not only stormwater and how it needs to be managed, but also about watersheds and really ultimately watershed management. So thrilled to be here in particular with this crowd. It's an important topic, particularly right now when what we're dealing with all around. So now I'll go back on script. So I want to thank you all for coming this afternoon. 2025 National Stormwater Policy Forum. This is the 9th annual time that WEF and NMSA have hosted the event. I want to start by thanking our two host organizations, National League of Cities and National Association of Counties. Thank you again. This is the 3rd year that we were able to be hosted here. Really appreciate that. And appreciate the staff of NLC and NACO. They've been amazing in helping to orchestrate all this. I also want to recognize the fantastic partnership between WEF and NMSA to put this event on for so many years. So thank you. But special thanks to a group of volunteers and some staff members that have again organized just a terrific agenda. I'm gonna say all their names and then we're gonna clap. We'll see if we can pull this off. Pat Bradley, please identify yourself if you're here, please. I think there's Pat. Lori Larson-Pugh, Brandon Colts. Brandon's back there. Andy Sauer. Wow, you guys are all lined up. Jamie Hool. There's Jamie. There's Jamie over here. Elizabeth Crossell. Elizabeth. Dave Smith. Saw Dave. There he is. Seth, of course. And then Lisa Deason. There's Lisa over here. Ashley Voskel. And Steve Dye. So thank you all. Please now thank them. I want to say this, the content of the agenda is great. It continues to bring together leading policy experts, and it's an excellent opportunity for us stormwater professionals to learn and network. It's probably one of the best things that we do in order to network amongst stormwater professionals. I want to give a big thanks to all the presenters that are going to come up on stage today for taking time out of their busy schedules to share their knowledge and really engage with us on stormwater policy matters. Stormwater management remains one of the intractable challenges for communities nationwide, and I think we all know this, especially in the face of the need for more preparedness due to climate change. And we shouldn't be afraid to say that, and I'm glad we're saying it nice and loud here at the event today. But it's also a challenge with what we have with funding and affordability, and that will be touched upon today as well. From a WEF standpoint, our mission is to help water professionals like yourselves understand the challenges facing the water sector and to find solutions to them through innovative, collaborative, and obviously that good old-fashioned persistence that we all need in this day and age. I hope that today's forum helps the entire water community continue to move forward on finding solutions to water challenges. And finally, I'd like to say thank you to Atkins Realis for the generous sponsorship of the reception that will be following our afternoon. I look forward to seeing everybody there. But now I would like to pass this over to Jamie Houle from the University of New Hampshire. Please welcome Jamie.
All right, thank you. I didn't know all I had to do was mention Fortran and I would get a tremendous applause. It was 8tran when I started. I'm just kidding. Anyway, so I am not so eloquently trying to fill the shoes also of Scott Taylor. And the reason being is I am, in addition to being vice chair of the Executive Stormwater Committee for WEF, with Elizabeth Krause as our chair, I'm also the vice chair for the National Municipal Stormwater Alliance. So, you know, just trying to piece this stormwater puzzle all together. And yeah, thank you all for attending. We had in these times, we've seen the largest turnout ever. So we've had over 100 people register in person, and we have over 200 people participating online. So welcome to this 9th Annual Policy Forum. And I also want to thank the National Association of Counties and the National League of Cities, WEF, and NAMSA, and all the people that are going to speak today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Charlotte. All right, welcome.
Can everybody hear me? Okay. Well, good rainy afternoon, everyone. Thank you all so much for braving the weather, or maybe for bringing it from Philadelphia. I don't know, whatever you're feeling today, but we're so excited that you all could join us. My name is Charlotte Mitchell Dicehart, and I have the pleasure of serving as an associate legislative director here at NACO on our government affairs team, where I lead our environment, energy, and land use policy work. And we are so excited to host this event today with our partners, the National Municipal Stormwater Alliance, the Water Environment Federation, and our partner in this and so many other things, the National League of Cities. For those of you who aren't familiar with NACO, we represent the elected officials and hardworking staff of all 3,069 counties, parishes, and boroughs across the country. So that's your trivia fact of the day. How many counties, parishes, and boroughs are across the country? We also have state association partners in all 50 states that we work very closely with to advance the interests of local governments at the county level. And I hope that you will consider NACO as a resource and a partner in stormwater management issues, but also water infrastructure more broadly going forward, especially as we have lots of water provisions that are in need of reauthorization from the IIJA next year. So looking forward to partnering with you all on that. Investing in water infrastructure is a key function of local governments, and it's critical that we work together with Congress and the administration to ensure federal support for water infrastructure, and for this group, especially any policies that relate to stormwater management. So thank you all again for being here today. Looking forward to a great afternoon and some great discussions. And with that, I will turn it over to Carolyn with NLC.
Hi, everyone. I'm Carolyn Barrett with the National League of Cities. I'm on the federal advocacy team and I cover the energy and environment portfolio. We're pleased to host this event with all of our partners. And for those that aren't familiar with National League of Cities, we represent 19,000 cities, towns, and villages across the country. We work with mayors, council members, and city staff. The majority of our members are at least 75% are considered small communities of 50,000 or less. And we also have 49 state municipal leagues. Unfortunately for us, not Hawaii. But I hope you'll consider NLC a resource on stormwater issues and water infrastructure broadly, as well as climate and sustainability issues. And of course, we know there's a connection on all of this. Stormwater management is the biggest challenge for local governments right now, and utilizing nature-based solutions is a key priority and opportunity. So I want to give a shout out to some of my NLC colleagues in the room who work on our Smart Surfaces and Resilient Infrastructure Technical Assistance Program, helping cities build community resilience through smart surfaces such as green infrastructure. It's an important moment for cities and counties in terms of investing in our nation's water infrastructure and making progress towards these climate action goals and building resilience. And of course, we want to be at the table for these ongoing and upcoming policy and funding conversations to really help shape what's next for local governments. So I look forward to the discussion today on these timely issues, and I want to thank all of our speakers for being with us to share important regulatory and congressional updates and discuss policy issues impacting local stormwater management. And I look forward to connecting with everyone here today and how NLC can support your work at the local level. But thank you for being here and lending your voice on this important conversation. So with that, I'm pleased to introduce our first speaker today for keynote remarks. Joe Kane is a fellow at Brookings Metro. His work focuses on a wide array of issues within the built environment, including transportation and water infrastructure. And within these areas of research, he's explored infrastructure's central economic role across different regions, as well as its relationship to opportunity and resilience. He has also examined challenges and opportunities facing the country's infrastructure workforce, including within the water sector. And he has a recent report on water affordability. Prior to Brookings, Joe was an economist at the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. He holds a master's degree in urban and environmental planning from the University of Virginia and a bachelor's degree in economics and history from the College of William and Mary. So please join me in welcoming Joe Kane to share remarks about recent trends around water infrastructure policy and funding from a national, state, and local level. Okay, so hopefully that's going to work for you. It might be a little bit of a delay.
Great. I was going to say good morning, everyone, but it's already afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. So thanks, Carolyn. Thanks to Steve, Seth, NMSA, WEF, trying to think of everyone to thank, NLC, NACO. Thanks for everyone for being here. Joe Kane, I'm a fellow at Brookings. I'll probably provide a little bit of a broader perspective than probably some of the other speakers to follow. As Carolyn was describing, I do a lot in the economic development space. So I certainly did get my start actually in water infrastructure around stormwater issues right here in the Chesapeake Bay kind of watershed with TMDL issues. So I can get into the weeds of this, but I think of broader sort of ramifications around other policymakers, other planners who may not be thinking about these issues all the time, and often the justification and value add really for them to be thinking of these issues. So I recognize some of this is probably going to be preaching to the choir a little bit, but I'm looking forward to going through some more details here. Let's see if this is going to work. Let's see if we can get through the first hurdle here of the slides. So Carolyn, is it the arrow or? Oh, there we go. Perfect. Okay. Minor technical difficulty. Okay. So I'm going to talk about both sort of national, state, and local perspectives. I imagine we'll probably get these perspectives throughout the entire day. So I'm going to try to cast a wide net and touch on all of them. I don't really probably need to go through too many of these details to this crowd, but I think the reality of our not just our stormwater infrastructure, but our drinking water infrastructure, our wastewater infrastructure, aging, in native repair and replacement, not just building a bunch of new stuff, but actually maintaining a lot of what we already have built out, leaking pipes, et cetera. There we go. In terms of, I think the elephant in the room often here is the money. So for those who aren't even focused on these issues, number one question I usually get is, well, how much is this going to cost? Where's the money going to come from? I imagine we're going to have a lot of follow-up conversations on this topic later today. But this is just one stat from EPA in terms of the drinking water and clean water needs assessments that come out every few years, just in terms of capital needs over the next 20 years, $744 billion. I'm going to be throwing a lot of numbers out there in the next few slides, but I think ASCE, right, in their report card that just came out, and there's a lot of different statistics, and I think they all point in the general same direction, that the need far exceeds the capacity and the ability to often respond to it, at least in terms of funding and financing. Governance, reality that there are more than 50,000 different systems across the country, that our watershed boundaries don't match our political boundaries. I think we all kind of get that, but it makes it really difficult from a research and policy perspective when we can't really measure these things too well, or at least translate them in ways for those folks who may not be familiar with watersheds or some of the issues that we deal with every day. And then I think, unavoidably talking about the reality, there's a moving target here, right? So yes, we have all these existing needs that are getting more significant and more severe, but also the unpredictability and the frequency of various climate impacts. And you can see just in terms of flooding alone being a huge challenge that's facing many places across the country. What I'd like to point out, and this comes from some surveys, but the mismatch between investment demand and institutional capacity, right? So I think if you talk to most Americans who aren't versed in this stuff, they'll be like, yeah, of course, I believe in investing in water infrastructure. You can see 88% here, according to this one survey. But then, talk to utilities, and it's, I think they believe they want to do it, but can they actually respond to that demand? Do they feel confident that they can actually stay ahead, be proactive on these needs? And I think that's where we often see a breakdown, just given the reality of the situation of just existing needs and evolving needs over time, and whether those needs can be addressed through rates and other fees that are already on hand. This is a great chart. I won't go through all of it here, but this is from a recent McKinsey report that I'm sure some of you have seen. I think gets more precisely at some of these funding gaps. Again, not just for stormwater, but when we look at the available funding that's often on the plate here, you can just see for 2024 versus 2030, that gap is increasing over time. Again, different statistics are being thrown out there. $110 billion funding gap could grow to $195 billion. I showed you the $744 billion gap over the next 20 years. So, these are pretty sizable totals. And the reality is that these are not living in a vacuum, right? These are gaps that are only growing over time, and the lack of capacity that I'll be talking about at a state and local level often to address them. This is from the Congressional Budget Office. If they come out with data every few years on the public spending for both transportation and water infrastructure, including water resources, that's shared among federal, state, and local governments. They actually just came out with an update, so I could update this. This actually goes now through 2023, but it pretty much shows the same trend line where you can see that federal spending is trickling down, right? It reached about a high in the 1970s, around 20, I'm trying to remember on top of my mind, 20-ish percent, 23%. It's now around 10%. For the country for water resources. So reality facing a lot of state and local leaders as well, this isn't just a blip. This is a long-term trend that's been evolving for many decades. And it's the reality that's facing them of the pressure, the financial pressure that's really weighing down on their shoulders. I don't know if how many of you have seen this, but at Brookings Metro, we released a couple years ago this tool called the Federal Infrastructure Hub. So we are still technically in the IIJA, IRA sort of rollout, if you will. I understand there's a lot of uncertainties around that, but we have gone through all of the various provisions and programs within those pieces of legislation, so you don't have to, and made it possible to toggle between different sectors of infrastructure, different agencies that are responsible for these issues, including within the water sector, so including for drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater. If you were to click on that appropriately colored water sort of aqua box there in the lower right, that will, there we go. That will enlarge it, and you can actually see the breakdown for where all of this increased federal funding has come from, at least through FY 2022 through FY 26. As we all know, a lot of that is going through the state revolving funds for a variety of reasons, for PFAS, for lead pipe remediation, et cetera. So again, not just stormwater issues, but anyway, we've been tracking this, including when White House data was available on this. The White House is no longer releasing data on this, but I think we're going to be having one final update in the next month or two. So this is all publicly available and free online. So I mean, I would say you can peruse at your leisure, but it might be a helpful tool and resource as we're considering the continued rollout of this funding. Get this right at some point. Okay, so I think the reality of the here and now, right? So we have these longer term national trends of, okay, generally declining federal support, declining federal funding around our water infrastructure. The reality of state and local responsibility. They've always been the owners and operators of this, but now becoming increasingly more the primary investors of all of this. Yes, an infusion, a historic infusion in terms of the IIJA anyway, but even that historic infusion, I'd even point the total for that, but it was about $55 billion. Compare that to the $744 billion that I was showing a few slides earlier, the $110 billion to almost $200 billion on that McKinsey chart. So, you know, we haven't put a dent into just the funding gap here. And now I you know, could probably just have a whole conversation just on this, but the uncertainty that kind of is dominating at the moment. And I'll just say every day from non-water folks, I get a lot of questions of, well, what does this mean? What is happening? What can you tell me? And I think there's just a lot of uncertainty is my general sense of this. And I think there's a lot of, and this is just my own 2 cents. I think a lot of the sky is falling, and we, you know, funding is going to decline, and we just don't know. I mean, there's just a lot of uncertainty at the moment, and I think we see that not only in sort of the media headlines, but hopefully, you know, I found that it helps talking about it, having conversations like we're having today, to point out the fact that this is a window of both uncertainty, but also continued need for planning and investment moving forward. So if that's kind of the national context, could go a lot more into that and sort of the federal you know, issues at play, and I'll defer to some of my federal colleagues who will probably have many more insights than I will on at least the latest there. I did want to profile some of the state level issues here. I often feel you know, we talk a lot about national, federal, and then zoom right down to kind of local, but I really think it is important to look at the state role in these issues. And as I said before, at least in the rollout of the IIJA funding, the state revolving funds in particular. And so this is, the next few slides build on some work that I did back in December. You can find it online. Just Google my name, Brookings, Joe Kane, SRFs. You'll probably find the report right there. But my colleagues and I did a wide view of both the clean water state revolving funds and the drinking water state revolving funds, in particular to look at the planning process and the project selection process within those. We found that as this money has gone out across the country, just as a primer, a lot of leaders at a state and local level aren't even familiar with how SRFs work. They aren't familiar with the intended use plans. They aren't familiar with project priority lists. They aren't familiar with annual reports. And I'll be honest, my colleagues and I as researchers, where this is our job, we even had problems trying to find all these documents online, rooting through different PDFs, having to call individual state offices. And if we had challenges on this, I can only imagine those who don't have time to do this would have a challenge on this. So anyway, the point that I want to make here is, we need to better understand where the gaps are, right, in the movement of this funding. And it's a very different picture depending on where you're looking across the country. What I like to say is a lot of these needs are highly localized, they're highly siloed, they're highly fragmented, and some states and some local leaders are quite honestly better equipped and more positioned to address some of these needs than others. So the three buckets that my colleagues and I looked at when we were going through these various documents were planning, so kind of looking at the intended use plans to better understand, well, where are some of the strategic goals and priorities moving forward? What do those even look like? How do we better define those? Project selection, what types of projects are being selected consistently across the country? What sort of indicators and variables are being used to rank or prioritize these projects? Are there certain criteria, particularly around climate issues? We know there are certain federal requirements for intended use plans, but what states are really punching above their weight? Which states are going above those basic requirements here? That was of our interest. And then this last bucket that I'll drill a little deeper into on capacity. The reality that probably a phrase that was thrown around a lot the last few years is technical assistance, TA. I don't even know what that means. I feel like a lot of people just throw that around and they don't even know what it means. But I think the reality that there is a lack of fiscal, technical, and programmatic capacity of utilities and other applicants to even access this funding. And it's a longer term challenge, I think, that's existed for many years beyond just the rollout of IIJA funding, for example. So this is, I know there's a lot on this slide. I promise it won't be kind of death by PowerPoint here. We asked a total of 20 plus different questions across these different documents for the SRFs. And these are just the capacity related questions. So those questions that are under that third bucket that we were trying to see, like what are these documents telling us around these different priorities? And you'll see there are a lot of questions here around staffing, right? Are there even people to be able to respond to apply for this funding? Are there descriptions of technical assistance, or at least clearly defining what that means? Are there other funding mechanisms, particularly around green infrastructure beyond the state revolving funds, that are acknowledged or even identified in these plans? And you'll see it's kind of across the board. There's two bars here, one for the clean water, the CWSRFs, and then the drinking water, the DW SRFs. And I'll just point your attention to kind of this top couple ones around staffing, for example. I mean, very rarely are we seeing this really defined or measured or recognized across these plans. They may pay mention to it, say, well, if we invest in this, we're going to create a bunch of good jobs. They don't really talk about who's doing it, who's doing the work, who's going to be the grant writer doing this. State agencies, departments of environment, natural resources, et cetera, whoever's the primary lead on the SRFs, they may have individual staff members in some cases traveling to visit localities to help them with these issues, but that's not always common. It's not always very clear, to be totally honest, when we look at these documents, or we even go to some of the agency websites to find this information. So again, just a snippet of what we saw in this report, but to point out, yes, the capacity gaps, but also really the haziness around how we're defining capacity and how we hope to address it. Just a few of the quick takeaways. Planning, I think, is probably the least interesting, quite frankly. I think a lot of places are really good about saying what goals they're going to want to do, that they've got all these ambitious efforts over the next decade or two. Project selection, I would say it breaks down a little bit more. I won't go into all the details here. You can go to the report webpage actually to find more details on a state-by-state basis. But we'll find, there are project priority lists that are pretty easy to find. I do think that there is a lack of clarity on the criteria that are often used to rank these projects. And particularly with certain categories like climate, it is especially unclear. And then capacity, which I'll go into a little bit more here, just acknowledgement of it maybe, but no real clear definition of those constraints and what should be done about them. And this isn't anything really new. I mean, I should say, we're kind of a part of a growing chorus here, I think, Brookings. I mean, GAO has done reports on this. The Duke Nicholas Institute has done reports on this. Actually, EPA's Inspector General Office has done reports on this, but I think it's only gaining more attention over time. So just a few quick maps that you can find on the report webpage that might be of interest. So, if you look at the left here on sort of those categories around capacity that I was just describing a minute ago. So technical assistance, we're finding, it's mentioned, pretty frequently across a lot of these states, both in their clean water SRF planning materials as well as their drinking water SRF materials. Again, not really too surprising. Starts to completely fall apart when you start to probe a little deeper around, well, what other dedicated funding mechanisms are there around green infrastructure, for example? And I could get into, well, how are we defining green infrastructure? We were trying to use a very broad definition for this, and we were still having challenges. I think there's a lot of usual suspects here. Well, California has this, and Oregon, and New York, but we were pretty surprised. We didn't know. We honestly didn't know what we would find, and I think you can see it falling apart. Staffing demands somewhat similarly, right? So I'm kind of just repeating myself from before, but really not a lot, at least consistently across the country. So I mean, a big challenge, I think, of we recognize there are these issues, but really in the materials we're putting out there, and we're defining and selecting projects and engaging with communities, we're really not defining or holding ourselves accountable to these issues, which I think underscores the important role that states have here. And I imagine the state role is only going to become more important over the coming years. Not hiding the ball, I think there's like 30 gubernatorial elections next year alone. So in as much as we focus on all this federal uncertainty and all the headlines and that sort of, really matters, but not losing sight of the state role in this, I think is really, really important. Next slide. There we go. Okay. So where do we go from here? So I'm going to start to turn a little bit more to the local issues, which I imagine we'll be, again, talking about more in follow-up conversations. So, I think a lot of this is, this report that we did was not geared just to water folks. So it was like, well, yeah, of course, there needs to be collaboration between, federal leaders and local utilities. Like, no kidding, right? Expanding technical assistance with states and local utilities. This is stuff I'm even looking at some folks from EPA. It's like, yeah, I've heard this before. States, though, getting a little more detailed on the timelines, the targets, and the criteria, I think. Again, I'm kind of generalizing here when I'm talking about some of these issues, but really is pretty widespread and problematic in areas, I think, for intervention moving forward. And in particular, centering those capacity needs, I think, as part of the SRF planning and project selection process. For example, around staffing, I think is something certainly to consider. On the local front, which I'll get into here, testing different sort of financing tools, to proactively manage these investment needs. The SRFs are not a solution in themselves. They're just one option in the toolkit, right? As places are just trying to figure out how are we going to pay for all of this. So there is no silver bullet solution. I imagine that's going to come up several times on other conversations today, that there are a variety of strategies and options and best practices, but also a lot of struggles and challenges around these issues. And it's not going to take one single utility or one single jurisdiction that's going to solve all of this and crack the code. If there is, I'd love to meet them, but I think it's going to require a lot of experimentation, probably some failure, and an ability to be actually more proactive to experiment to begin with. So when I say sort of the importance of state and local leadership, this kind of goes back to some of that CBO data I was showing before. This is not anything new. You can see even since the 1970s, the share in terms of state and local public infrastructure spending has gone up from about 65% or so. And we almost hit 80% in 2023. This is, by the way, now this doesn't reflect all of the influx from the IIJA and some of the federal infusions we've seen, but the fact that we're still seeing this ticking up, even amid historic once-in-a-generation federal infrastructure funding, to me says this trend is only going to grow, probably over time. And so, I try not to be, sugarcoating the situation, but the reality facing a lot of state and local leaders is one of increased fiscal responsibility on these issues. This is a piece that I did a few years ago, could probably be updated. So Western Kentucky University actually does a terrific survey on stormwater utilities. Getting a better understanding of the geographic granularity around these issues, I think, is really important. And you can see the concentration of at least at a local level of where even stormwater utilities are located across the country. So I mean, there are whole states really that don't have a lot of capacity here. You know, congratulations if you're talking to someone from Minnesota or Wisconsin. But if you're talking to some folks, I'm making up, I'm looking like Mississippi, right? Doesn't look like it has too many stormwater utilities. New Mexico looks like maybe there's one. So you know, huge geographic bifurcation or diversification on these issues, and I think it's just really important to bear in mind of where some of these efforts are actually already happening, and where hopefully more efforts are going to be needed moving forward. And then, you know, kind of on a project basis, a piece that my colleagues and I have been focusing quite a bit on is the need for more resilient upgrades, right? So we can't just keep doing business as usual. Just let's just rebuild what we already had amid these climate impacts. I think that's unfortunately what happens in a lot of places because it's, well, that's what we know how to do. That's how we contract. that's how we select projects. Let's just keep doing it because it's probably the shorter term, cheaper fix, quite honestly. And so we discussed these issues with a variety of both public and private leaders. You know, the huge appetite, at least prior to this current administration, on I won't say ESG, but on green infrastructure investment. I still think there is appetite in that. The reality, though, is that there's a lack of information and knowledge of even where are the points of intervention when we choose and select and prioritize these projects. And so thinking of when we're scoping the projects or even financing them, there are a variety of steps and areas where I think both local leaders, but also other public and private leaders can better coordinate on these issues when we are looking at more resilient upgrades. So happy to provide links to this report that where there's more information on this. This is just one single chart that has a lot packed into it, but I would just say accountability really matters on this. So, you know, not just sort of getting the money out there and identifying where the needs are, but actually measuring and holding ourselves accountable to where are these projects happening? How are they working? You know, I think they're happening in different ways across the country. You know, certain groups, you know, Corvius, Quantified Ventures, others, I think are testing some of these issues. But I think there's an opportunity for a larger marketplace on some of these ideas beyond just, oh, we need more federal funding on these issues. And I would be remiss as a Brookings I mean, the reality, I might even mention like WIFIA and you know, the reality of the shift to loans, right? And loan programs, competitive loan programs. You know, I'm certainly, if there are any folks here from the EPA finance office, they may have some thoughts on this too. But you know, I will say even on the private investment here, that data isn't very good either. I've spoken with folks who work in the green bonds area, climate bonds, they kind of different flavors of muni bonds. I mean, they're really basically municipal bonds, but they're just sort of colored differently because of the sort of projects that they're helping support. In my view, that's where a lot of the private financing is happening here, is continues to be in the muni market. I don't see a lot of like, I guess you call it like braiding or cobbling together of you know, federal, state, or I mean, local leaders, of course, have to understand there's skin in the game here, right? It's not like, well, sign me up. And I think we've seen cautionary tales in the past. I won't get into like public-private partnerships, but we know even right in Prince George's County, right, with community-based public-private partnerships is one model that's been put out there. I think a lot of these are just so locally specific, and you know, I would caution again on sort of that capacity issue. A lot of places barely have the ability to just keep doing what they're doing, let alone you know, have the sophistication to chart out what is a very intentional and proactive, you know, private financing approach that might be different here. So again, this is where I do think that state leaders could play a role, federal leaders could play a role to test some of these ideas. I don't want to say, oh, well, you know, private investment is guaranteed to be a good thing, or there's obviously appetite there for revenue, and there has to be an ROI. And I don't know if that's at odds with the public good and the public service often with these projects, I would argue. So yeah, it's a good question, but yeah.
In your analysis of the state IUPs, did you do any sort of analysis of the projects that weren't funded, like the amounts that were the gap, basically?
Yeah, if someone wants to do that, they it's a good point. Yeah, we had a heavy enough time just trying to sift through what information was out there, and we had to, you know, reach out individually to several states. I want to say 24, I mean, almost half of them, to even find some of these materials. I mean, something that came up in our research that I think would be of interest over time. How has this changed over time? Are these plans getting better? You know, there were a lot of federal incentives, if you will, or sticks, carrots and sticks to, hey, you should include more climate issues in these, at least during the last administration. You know, how does that compare to like an intended use plan from like 3 or 4 years ago, right? But we can barely find the current plans, let alone ones that are from like 2 or 3 years ago. And so, you know, it's a moving target. And so in as much as it's not just the projects that aren't being selected in a given year, I think there's questions of which projects are not being selected over time. How are those plans evolving over time? And then how is the state really changing how it's doing this? And I would hope that it's getting better. I mean, that was the general sense I got from talking with some folks kind of off the record at the state level and in different departments, but even they don't entirely know, right? And I mean, maybe they do on their they're literally on their local servers. They have like V1 of a plan from 2 or 3 years ago, but publicly available, not really. Yeah.
Hi, I'm curious about some of the workforce issues that you were talking about, particularly with the shifts that we're seeing with federal programming and like with the Good Jobs Act and everything.
Right.
At the state level, how are you seeing some of that, you know, kind of playing out? And if you have any examples, that would be really interesting to hear about.
Yes.
Thanks.
So huge continued appetite for workforce development, not just in the water sector by itself, but often in the broader sort of skilled trades arena. And so what you're often, or at least I've seen, is you're seeing efforts among transportation agencies, water agencies, energy departments, broadband providers. It is, you know, a much larger issue than just the water sector. And I think what I've often said is the water sector is emblematic of these broader sort of super sector concerns around infrastructure, that we shouldn't just be looking at infrastructure or water by itself, that like water actually in terms of its workforce needs has a lot in common with some of these other sectors in terms of the underlying skills. Now, obviously specializations in licensing and credentialing and needed experience, but But the skills, the baseline skills to get people into this work among younger individuals in particular is pretty common. And you know, the unfortunate thing among many states and localities at the moment is a competitive mindset of, well, we only have so much talent, so we're going to outcompete each other for the few people who can do this. And that's kind of a race to the bottom, in my opinion. We need to increase the overall pool of talent here to make it a bigger pool, so just more people in general can just be deployed for these careers across different agencies, different geographies. It isn't just like people leaving rural utilities that don't pay enough and go to urban. Like, I mean, I've heard this all over the place. And so state leaders, I will say, even amid the federal uncertainty at the moment, are trying to do more planning on this. And they're trying to do better, to give them credit, trying to do better on making it more of a unified sort of sector strategy that engages. It isn't just like a research exercise, you know, done in sort of the back rooms, but you know, is engaging the actual employers and better understanding where are the collaborations emerging here, because it's you know, involves engagement from community colleges, from labor groups, from you know, community-based organizations when we think of supportive services. So, I mean, if you want to get more, you know, women involved, for example, then starts to become a childcare issue, and you know, other issues come to the forefront there. So I will say that this continues to be a priority for a lot of places, and I say that both like red and blue in a good way. Where that's headed, I think, is a big question, because in terms of the ultimate impact, because we talk about the opportunity here and quite honestly, the risk of mission failure for some places, because it's like, if you're, I've seen in some like rural systems, you know, you have 5 total employees and 3 of your 5 people are eligible for retirement. I mean, 60% of your workforce could be gone. And I mean, you're quite literally risking mission failure at that point. So it's not just a nice to do, it's a must do. You know, there was a lot of appetite with the IIJA funding, for example. I talked a lot with DOL in particular on this to really not create stipulations, but really like, how can you use this extra funding to do things better, to reach more people and sort of not just do business as usual, right, on these issues. And I think it's really hard because we were jamming a lot of funding through existing programs that weren't always flexible to think differently or to work with different types of contractors. And we can talk about project labor agreements and local hire provision. There's a lot here, but I think that a lot of that goes beyond just what I like to say is it goes beyond just the current federal moment. And this is something I think in a good way that places are realizing needs to be addressed. Yeah. Yeah.
Joe, I do have a question for you, but I have a brief comment first.
Yeah.
And that is, I used to work at an EPA regional office, and
Yeah.
I helped to oversee the state SRF.
Oh, great.
Very interested in your assessment of those. My perception when we were doing that was that the federal focus was on maintaining the fiduciary integrity of the state programs. Spend the money.
Right.
Spend it really safely so
Right.
that it's repaid. So I guess my question is, did you in your study look at how EPA is overseeing the SRF programs and whether and how they're using any of their oversight power to try to push states, which have gotten a lot of deference to do what they want, to attend to some of these areas that you've identified as potential deficiencies?
We did. It wasn't the primary focus of the report because our primary audience really were state and local, I would say state and local economic development leaders who just don't even understand how SRFs work. So part of it was just giving them a primer of like, hey, here's the process. And oh, by the way, for the priorities you care about, right, around like economic opportunity and climate issues, like those just really aren't appearing in how this funding is going out there, because a lot of places just didn't even understand how this process worked. We did this actually for a separate piece on transportation too. So among like state departments of transportation and that whole process, which is its own beast. And it's just kind of frightening actually in many ways of just how little a lot of people, like leaders across the country who are not in this infrastructure space, really understand how this funding flows. And it creates a sort of a lock-in effect, I would argue, of why we do the same sort of projects and they benefit kind of the same types of places and we have the same sort of problems ongoing. And so, but I did connect with EPA pretty frequently. If there were a next iteration of this work, I believe the GAO report actually got into more detail on that. So we're not trying to like duplicate some of what had already been put out there. But I think obviously there have been changes in the past few months. So we were doing this right before the transition. But it's a good point and something we had talked about, but maybe as a next iteration of the work. Yeah.
So we have time for one more question. I'm going to read a question that someone virtually submitted in the chat. The SRLF distribution is dependent on the states completing EPA's survey, especially for stormwater. Was this part of your capacity evaluation?
I would say partially. I don't know if we got to that level of specificity or granularity. I mean, I'll be honest, we kind of threw a broad suite of 20 plus questions just to see what we could find. And by we, I mean myself and one research assistant on this. So if I had an army of graduate students or research assistants working with me, maybe I would have had a greater ability to do that. But yeah, I mean, it's I would put that in the category of if we were to do a version 2 of this, of, you know, and if that of, I mean, hearing that it's of interest, which it sounds like it is, so maybe there would be an appetite around that. Maybe we could better, you know, split apart some of those categories and some of those questions to really precisely get at like stormwater in that case. Yeah. Cool. Thanks.
Thank you again, Joe. Appreciate it very much. Ed and Tim, y'all want to come on up? So the next panel we have, next session we have is our congressional update. And I'm very pleased to introduce our 2 participants. Tim Petty is senior professional staff with the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee Water Resources and Environment Subcommittee. And Ed Higgins, Dr. Ed Higgins, is with the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. He is the water policy advisor, and his PhD is in water policy ecology. Water quality ecology. So he's very appropriately trained and educated in the matters that we are discussing today. So with that, I think what we're going to do is both of them are going to make a few remarks about what's going to happen, what's happening in their respective bodies in the House and Senate, and then we'll have some time for some Q&A. So please think of a few questions you may have. So go ahead, Tim. Why don't you start?
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. Tim Petty. Looking forward to some good questions on.
I'm going to stall by getting a chair because I don't want to stand up for an hour. Hi, everybody. Very comfy? Right. So we heard some hot topics. Now we're going to hear some hot legal topics. Okay, just like when the plot thickens, as they say. Our panel is going to focus on several recent cases, Supreme Court cases, and other legal developments that seem likely to impact stormwater management and regulation across the country. I'm Dave Smith. Pardon me. I'm a water policy consultant and not an attorney, so I am unique up here. I spent most of my career working at US EPA in the Pacific Southwest region. But we're very happy to have on the panel Amanda Aspator, and she is with the National Association of Clean Water Agencies, Fred Andes with Barnes and Thornburg, Becky Hammer with the Natural Resources Defense Council, and batting cleanup, Sean Rowland over at the Association of Clean Water Administrators. And thank you all for being here. So there's going to be some time for you to grill this great panel of people. So start thinking about what you want to ask them. For each issue area we're going to explore, I'm going to ask a panelist to briefly introduce that key case or legal issue, because we don't want to assume that you all have your black belt in Supreme Court law. And then we're going to kind of consider some questions about how that case or that legal issue might affect stormwater management. And I'm going to ask you panelists to kind of explore your views about how you think these things might relate to stormwater management. And, you know, hopefully we'll get a little disagreement going here between y'all, because I know y'all don't agree on everything, and it'll be more interesting that way, and it'll get us to our break. So we're going to jump right in with the Loper Bright Supreme Court case and the demise of Chevron deference. So Fred, would you please summarize the case and comment about how you see that decision affecting judicial review of stormwater regulations and permits based on those regulations? And please use the microphone. Yeah.
Good afternoon. I'd say that in one respect, as we discussed, I have a little bit of a unique perspective on the Chevron case and Loper Bright because I was actually involved in the Chevron case, which dates me. But I was a young lawyer, and the industry group that I was working with in 1984 filed briefs in the Chevron case. I think the result was a surprise to a lot of people, and not necessarily in the way that the people who brought the case wanted it to become an issue. But the Chevron case really has been an incredibly powerful precedent over 40 years, and it's come to stand for probably more than if you actually read the opinion. But the general concept of deference to agencies, particularly where statutes are ambiguous, is what we've generally referred to as the Chevron concept. Note that that doesn't mean deference in every circumstance, and it's more about deference on really legal issues. So it's important to think about Loper Bright in that context, which is that what the Supreme Court did in this new case, the Loper Bright case, which was not an environmental case, it was more about restrictions on boats and whether the agency at issue had properly interpreted its authorizing statute to allow it to impose certain fees on boat owners. And the Supreme Court said, no, it disagreed with the agency. The agency said, we think the statute's pretty vague, and therefore we interpret it a particular way, and you should defer to our interpretation. And the Supreme Court basically said, no, we're never doing that again. And if you read the opinion, it's pretty stark, which is there's almost no discussion of the facts, because in all honesty, I don't think they cared about the facts. They took that case to overrule Chevron. But what that means both more and less than what we think about or what you hear in the media. Again, the concept in Chevron was where a statute's ambiguous, you defer to the agency's legal interpretation. Supreme Court said that's gone. So what that means is where there's an ambiguous statute, the court will make up its own mind as to what the best interpretation of the statute is, even if under Chevron, if the agency's interpretation was reasonable, even if it isn't the one you'd pick, if it's reasonable, the court would go along with it. The court now has said, no, that's not the rule anymore. We don't care if it's reasonable. We care if it's right. So it's an interesting concept. There's one right interpretation, and you have to find it, and that's the one you have to pick. And if you pick the wrong one, we're going to overrule you and pick the right one, the judges. Okay? So a pretty strong assertion of power by judges to say, if it's a legal issue, we're going to decide it. We don't care what you think, agency, even if it's in your area, we're going to decide it. Now, what that doesn't do is it doesn't deal with factual issues, scientific issues. And the court, in fact, made that pretty clear, was they weren't saying that when an agency is acting on scientific issues within its expertise, that deference was gone. That actually relates more to another case, the Skidmore case, and that remains. So even under Loper Bright, there still should be deference on factual scientific issues. Now, are the courts lately doing that? Not really, but that's not a Loper Bright issue. That's a more which judges were appointed by which president issue, and you have a lot more judges right now who are skeptical of agencies generally, and who are paying less deference to agencies generally. But that's not Loper Bright. Loper Bright only deals with the issue of when statutes are ambiguous, the courts will not defer to the agency interpretation of the statute. They'll make up their own minds. Now, some feel like that's sort of oh, that's great for industry. And I've said to people, wait a minute, that can go both ways. When a statute may be clear in favor of regulation or against regulation. And what the courts now are supposed to do is make up their own mind on those issues. And I can see cases being brought by a variety of different actors saying statute, here's what we think the statute means. Don't defer to the agency anymore. You have to make up your own minds and pick the right view. So it won't affect factual determinations. It will affect legal determinations where a statute's ambiguous, but it could go one way, it could go the other.
Bring in the other panelists, and I'll ask you to kind of bring this to Stormwaterville, where we live. And please, as you chime in with your views, please try to talk about how a stormwater manager or somebody in the stormwater business should be anticipating in terms of its effects. Anybody want to jump in? I'll pick on people if you don't. Becky, go ahead.
I guess I can start since the other half of the name of the Chevron case is Chevron versus NRDC. So I gotta take up the mantle. We lost that case. So actually one of my colleagues who's still at NRDC argued the case at the Supreme Court in 1973 or whenever it was. And then he was involved in Loper Bright, and he likes to say he lost that case twice. So bringing this to stormwater, I think there's a couple ways this could come into play. When we think about stormwater permitting and the Clean Water Act, I think a phrase that a lot of us immediately think about is maximum extent practicable, and what that means. And it's been debated for a long time. It's the standard that applies to municipal stormwater permits. I think it's possible that this decision could lead to different outcomes in permit challenges that hinge on what practicable means as a legal matter. Of course, as Fred said, Chevron deference never applied to factual determinations. So if we're arguing about whether a set of permit requirements is factually practicable and we all agree what the word means, then there's no change because the same level of deference would still apply. Another question you had teed up in our kind of prep for this was whether this could potentially open the door to overruling the Defenders of Wildlife versus Browner case from the 90s, in which the Ninth Circuit held that permitting agencies have the discretion to include water quality-based limits in stormwater permits if they want to, even though it's not required. And so, are we still going to defer to that interpretation of the statute? And I went back and reread the Defenders case, and it actually goes out of its way in the opinion to say we're not relying on Chevron deference. The statute clearly says that the permitting agency can include any such other provisions as it determines appropriate. So I don't actually think that this case will have an impact unless, of course, you can find a judge who's willing to say that those words are somehow ambiguous, which, I mean, anything's possible these days.
Mics. Operative federalism. Yeah.
Well, actually, it's funny you mentioned that because that's actually one of the things I was going to mention. So first off, Sean Rowland, Deputy Director at the Association of Clean Water Administrators. My folks are basically the state regulators. We also have interstates and territories that are members of the association. I just wanted to mention a couple of things. One, our folks are interact with EPA on a regular basis, have lots of conversations about what we think both the Clean Water Act and the regs are saying, and rely pretty heavily on their expertise when appropriate. And where we see ambiguity or see things, states may make a decision to do things a little different. I also just mentioned, I use the word states, that's all my members, but also not all states are the same. States come at things from different perspectives. The Clean Water Act is super flexible in allowing states to implement the programs in a way that meets the law, but not necessarily identical to each other. So the other thing I'd want to just mention is, places where there are ambiguity, places where you might see these breaks occurring and you might see litigation. Our folks are super sensitive to third-party litigation. Like, we're always wanting to have scientific and legal certainty. So when we move ahead, we're not going to be fighting about this in court. We can kind of work it out through the normal administrative processes. So I will say that I feel like this decision does create potentially more places for there to be more challenges. As Fred said, this is not one person really won or one group won and one group lost. Across the board, this just changes the landscape a little bit and makes it the conversations a little more interesting, both pre-litigation and then while you're in the middle of litigation, because there's always the threat hanging out there. So I just wanted to sort of touch a little bit on that, and also just mention states, of course, are implementing the Clean Water Act in the places where they're supposed to, but they also have state programs. They have state stormwater programs where they may be putting things into their NPDES permits that are from state authority, or they may be doing things separately, separate permits or separate program areas where it's really the state authority. It's a state program that's doing it. They're not relying on the federal agencies to support their work. So anyway, with that, I'll sort of stop and see.
Yeah, thanks. The only other thing I wanted to add was also picking up on something that Fred said in terms of who won and who lost. I would just say not everything gets to the Supreme Court. Everybody just assumes, oh, my legal case is going to get to the Supreme Court, and this is what this conservative Supreme Court's going to do. Most of these decisions are going to be decided more at the district court level, maybe appellate level. And so it really might play out differently depending on where you are in the country. And from a national perspective, that makes it a little bit challenging to help out utilities because where they are might dictate how this might play out for them. So that's just one thing I would flag. It matters where you are in terms of how this might play out.
Point. One more question on Loper Bright, which is, and I'm not going to put Lisa, and Chris even left the room. Oh, he's there, he's hiding. Okay. I'm not going to put you on the spot, but would the panel care to speculate on how this decision affects whether and how EPA might reopen the stormwater permitting rules? Anybody want to jump in? Did I stump the panel?
Well, I don't think that agencies generally are going to. Okay, I don't think agencies are generally going to leap to revise rules based on Loper Bright, despite some congressional hearings where EPA people were asked, well, what are you going to do with all those rules that are now illegal? Well, it's not really that they're illegal. On the other hand, I would say that if, say, this administration decided that the last administration or prior ones took the wrong view on a legal basis and said, well, we think what they said was just wrong, we're going to reopen the rule, we're going to reverse it and go the other way because it's the right interpretation, you could use Loper Bright to say then, sort of, we're putting it in front of the court, we're not asking for deference, we're saying we have the right interpretation and you guys should agree. So I guess you could use it as a tool in that way and to say, don't second guess us. We have the right interpretation. Now, whether the court will agree with that or not is another issue, but I could see that possibility.
Any other thoughts, panelists?
Yeah, I'll just mention, I think looking backwards is a little bit more challenging without having a lot of pressure coming from other places. I do think the agency as a whole on January 20th changed a little bit of their perspective based off of who's the new administration was, and that may impact it. But I do think going forward, general counsel is not stupid. They're going to be thinking a lot about the implications of Loper and whether they put themselves at risk. But I do think you're going to have a lot of pressure coming from different sources to drive the look back and try to figure out, because I think there's a lot of things they could say, well, we leaned on what we expected would be deference when we did this. And, they may still, at the end of the day, if there's litigation, may still come out on that side. But going forward, I do feel like general counsel is going to be a little conservative. I would be.
Fair enough. Well, let's move on to the recent decision in the city and county of San Francisco v. EPA case. And so, Amanda, I'm going to ask you if you would please summarize that case and talk a little bit about how you see that decision affecting the structure of future stormwater permits and associated actions.
Definitely. And Chris Kloss already said in the next panel he was going to disagree with everything I said. So spoiler alert, stay tuned for that. But so in this case, San Francisco Public Utilities Commission had a NPDES permit that was actually issued jointly by the state of California and EPA. And it had language that a lot of NPDES permits have in it, which is discharges shall not cause or contribute to the violation of water quality standards, and some other language. There were actually a lot of issues in the case early on, but what got up to the Supreme Court was mainly the cause or contribute language. And permittees have taken issue with that language for a very long time. And I think EPA's position has always been, what's the problem? You know, the Clean Water Act requires protecting water quality standards. Our regulations say NPDES permits need to make sure that discharges don't cause or contribute to the violation of water quality standards. We just put the language in there. What's your deal? And I think permittees have always taken the position like, yeah, we agree with you, but the whole point of the permit is to tell us, how do we make sure that that happens? We don't normally see speed limit signs that just say, hey, you in the Prius, don't speed. Like, you usually have more information to go on from that so that you make sure that you're not actually speeding. And so I think in the NPDES context, and in particular with respect to stormwater and clean water agencies, it's particularly important because any changes that you need to make to comply with your permit, a lot of times that involves a lot of infrastructure changes, a lot of investments. You need to be able to plan. Some surprises in life are good. Hey, surprise, your CSO tunnel isn't the right size. Not a good surprise, and not one that you can really plan for, and it makes your investments not very efficient. And in particular with the NPDES program, you've got citizen suit provisions. And so if you've got a provision in your permit where different people could read it different ways and different people can sue you to try and enforce those different ways, that's another big issue. And then you also have the Clean Water Act 402K permit shield provision, where supposedly if you're compliant with your permit, then you are considered to be compliant with the Clean Water Act. But I think from a permittee standpoint, if you never know if you're actually compliant with this kind of open-ended provision in your permit, how can you ever avail yourself of that protection that Congress gave you? And so in the stormwater context, to get into the world where you guys live in, I think that kind of language is even more problematic because that's not actually, as Becky alluded to, is not the legal standard necessarily applicable in the MS4 context. It's the maximum extent practicable. So then you kind of have this added layer of problems with that language being kind of tossed in the background of your permit. And so a majority of the Supreme Court agreed with San Francisco and a lot of utilities position. And they basically said these end result requirements are not lawful in NPDES permits. And that was a little confusing to anyone that's actually in water world, because it's like, aren't all water quality-based effluent limitations and result requirements? They went on, like, you need to keep reading. And they basically said the types of open-ended requirements that do not spell out what a permittee must do or refrain from doing is really what they were getting at, isn't lawful. And if you don't have those types of permit or provisions in your permit, then that really eviscerates the permit shield that you're supposed to be able to avail yourself of. And so that's sort of what the Supreme Court decided. You have to have actual provisions in your permit that tell you what you need to do or not do. And importantly, the court made very clear that narrative provisions, generally speaking, are fine, again, as long as they tell you what to do or not do. So things like BMPs and other things that are really important in the stormwater context, the court very clearly made sure that those are still lawful. And that's a really good thing that they went out of their way to do that as well. And so with that, I think that overall the decision is really going to be helpful to permittees. It's just going to make sure that you know exactly what you're supposed to be doing and not doing, and so that you can actually plan your infrastructure investments accordingly. But that's my 2 cents, and turn it over.
Any additional thoughts, folks?
I will offer some thoughts. I actually have kind of a hot take, which is that I don't think this is going to affect stormwater permits too much. Given that the prevailing legal standard for MS4s, at least, is the maximum extent practicable standard, which is a kind of a technology-based standard in the sense that it's not oriented toward water quality outcomes. It's oriented toward the permittee's level of effort. So most of the provisions that you see in municipal stormwater permits are oriented toward that type of standard, where it's what practices and actions does the permittee have to implement, and all of that would pass muster under the test that Justice Alito laid out. That's not universally true. There are stormwater permits that go above and beyond MEP, and for those, you know, all of the issues that Amanda just mentioned would come up. But that's kind of my spicy take.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts, because we've spent a lot of time over the last month or so trying to read it and reread it and figure out what it means, because we got a lot of clients who are wondering. And as Amanda said, it's confusing. And that happens sometimes when a judge, instead of referring to actual constitutional concepts like due process, which the judge didn't bother to mention, which we think is a real issue with narrative limits, is they're too vague and fuzzy and you don't know what to comply with. And the judges didn't decide the case on that basis. Instead, they decided on the basis of the dictionary and what a limitation is, and came up with this very odd distinction between, well, if your limit says your discharge can contain X, that's okay. But if it says your discharge can't cause X impact, that's not okay. Well, we're going through permits, and like some of them are clearly on one side or the other, and some of them are in the middle. Like a discharge can't contain stuff that causes the following impact in the receiving water. I'm like, which one is that? It's about stuff, but it's about stuff in the receiving water. Can I modify that provision? Can I like take out the part about the receiving water? But wait a minute, that's based on a water quality standard. Now, do I have to go back and change the state's water quality standard? I think so. If I'm going to change the language in the permits, because they're tracking the narratives, so then that gets complicated. So we're trying to figure out, and this also, you know, if we're thinking just sort of MS4s, I agree that it may not have as much impact. On CSOs, this could have a lot of impact, but I can't tell from the judges what impact it's supposed to have, because on the one hand, the San Francisco permit was a CSO permit, and they said this provision can't live. On the other hand, they referred to EPA guidance that contains this language and cited it approvingly. So I'm trying to figure out, and reading all the footnotes, like, well, what do I do now in terms of all the CSO permits? And what if you have a permit that has CSOs and MS4s, or CSOs and POTW limits? All right, I'm going to take this piece out, and maybe I can rewrite that piece, and this piece is okay. And we're all going to have to work through trying to divine, based on this sort of odd distinction that the court drew that we've never heard before, in all honesty, this end result requirement thing. We're going to have to try to figure out what that means. And as you know, in every state, the permit provisions are different and the narratives are phrased differently. So we're literally going through sort of state by state right now, trying to figure out, all right, well, the Indiana narrative looks like this, and that's probably out. But the Illinois one, that's a little fuzzier, maybe that's in. So there's not going to be, I think, clear answers on this for a while. And Sean, I'm sure you guys are going to have some really interesting discussions.
Yeah, I'll just add a couple things. One, the day after the decision, there were permit modifications occurring all across the country. No. I think the gut response was, okay, let's figure this out, and it's probably just going to be unenforceable until our next permit. Nobody's running to try to sort of fix the permits at the moment in time. Now, that could change. You know, we could get guidance from EPA that says we think this has to happen. But at this stage, we're sort of living with what we have. Secondly, I think you're right in the sense that if you're trying to shoehorn a standard into a permit, and the way you did it probably gets caught up with this particular decision, you're probably going to have to go back to the standard. Now, I will say some standards are really clean and easy and probably fall outside, but there's also times where a state might use translator language or something in the language that's different than the standard itself in an effort to try to make it make more sense to the permittee. And those are being reviewed by permit writers as well as the time comes. Cause and contribute has always, I think, been a little bit of a concern for anybody in the NPDES program. Cause is a little easier, contributes where it gets hairy. So I don't know what that means. Maybe we eventually have a program that makes a little bit more sense, but at the moment in time, we're sort of all trying to figure out what the heck the decision really means for both permit writers and permittees.
And I think that, David, I'd say one other thing is, some of us think like the result was the right result. The rationale they got to was a little confusing. But the other thing that we've said is, so everybody who thinks, oh, this means that permits will be less limiting. No, in fact, it's more likely that the result will be more numeric limits in permits, which a lot of our clients are really not particularly looking forward to, because I've pointed out, Susan, we've talked about this before, sometimes narratives are good, right? Sometimes narratives gives you some flexibility in situations where things are fuzzy. And to the extent that we're moving away from flexibility and moving toward getting more numeric limits in permits, that's something that, I mean, we anticipate that's going to be an issue, that people are going to be pushing for numeric limits in permits. The court seemed very unsympathetic to EPA. Like when EPA says, well, we need some flexibility, the court said, do your job. Well, do your job to the court seemed to mean issue numeric limits, which we don't think is really the right thing to in terms of doing their job. But I'm concerned that that will be a push after this decision, is more numeric limits in permits.
Well, I've heard from a number of folks this idea of like, hey, be careful what you ask for, guys. You may see more numeric limits depending on the state you're in. But I'd flog it a little further to ask y'all, what about how narrative limits are expressed, and BMP-based limits in particular? Should we expect to see a change in how permits create specificity around how BMP-based limits are expressed?
Can I just jump in really quickly? And I'm not sure that you'll see a big change in BMPs, but just to address the last point, I think the problem, and particularly with CSO communities who are reaching the end of their long-term control plans, when you have this uncertain language in your permit, those same numeric limits that you're talking about could get read in via a citizen suit at any time. And this makes sure that that doesn't happen. If you're going to have a numeric limit, you're going to know it, you're going to be able to plan for it. If you need a compliance schedule for it, you're going to actually be able to have it as part of your permit. It's not just going to be after the fact, constantly changing numeric targets that you're supposed to hit. So I would say that the decision does provide some much needed certainty. And that's certainly why the NACWA membership got behind it for 5 years. So
I just want to say two quick things. I know we're probably ready to move on. Okay, good. One is I got to speak up on behalf of folks who are concerned about this decision and the impact it will have on ensuring we can achieve clean water. You know, in a perfect world, if the outcome of the decision was that all permits would be more specific, have more numeric limits, and be just tighter and stricter, then that would, you know, that from the environmental perspective, that would be fine. But there's two problems with that. One is that we are in a context in which federal and state agency budgets are going down, especially at the federal level. I mean, you all know what's going on right now. So, you know, explain to me how permits are going to be written that include much more specific and numeric limits. That requires a lot of work. And so agency capacity to write those permits is a concern. And for some pollutants, it is really challenging to craft a permit limit that meets the test that Justice Alito kind of ambiguously described. For example, most limits on temperature say that, you know, are phrased as you shall not increase the temperature in the receiving water more than a certain number of degrees or above a certain temperature. That seems to run afoul of this ruling. Well, how else are you supposed to regulate temperature? So that's a concern. And then the kind of unrelated point was Sean was talking briefly about what's the impact going to be on existing permits, and said probably not much. But in the existing permit space, we have already seen permittees who were the subject of enforcement actions under these types of permit terms file motions for consideration saying, hey, you got to throw out this judgment against me. By the way, I want all my fees back and my attorney's fees back and everything. We already seen 2 MS4s in California file a motion for reconsideration in a citizen suit. So just something to keep an eye on.
One final point I was going to make and channel a point that Sean was making about, remember that a lot of states have the ability to incorporate provisions in permits that go beyond federal requirements. And so I wouldn't assume these sort of flaky narratives, whatever we're going to call it, these outcome-based narratives are necessarily going to disappear in all states, because a lot of states base things on state law authorizations. But now we're going to turn to the world of.
Hey, Dave, can I, there's some questions coming in here, and then there could be some questions.
Sure,
Can
go
we do
ahead.
that real quickly? Okay.
Yeah, why not?
And folks in the room, I can find you if you put your hand up. I'll just read one that just came in on the chat here. It said, many of the California's stormwater permits include the cause or contribute language. Will the SCOTUS prescription against this language be problematic in the context of those permits?
California is not unique. A lot of states have similar kinds of permit provisions. Y'all care to opine? We sort of opined a little bit already,
Well,
but without really answering the question.
Yeah,
But
I
go
think
ahead.
I think it actually depends. Because, for example, I'd say there's some states that do a really good job of justifying, and it goes back to Amanda's point, justifying how they set their permit limits, like Ohio, okay? Fact sheets are really complicated in Ohio because they go through every pollutant on your application and they say you're in category 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You get a limit, you just get monitoring, you get neither a limit nor monitoring, and it documents everything. There, you might say taking out the narratives has less impact because you can show that that permit adequately deals with water quality standards. It's dealt with every pollutant. Whereas I can think of other states where the fact sheet is 3 pages and you don't have a sense that they've gone through everything, and they may find it hard to explain in a permit appeal, well, like why, like if they don't have the narrative, they may feel more initiative to include the narrative because they haven't sort of documented that they've covered everything. So I think the impact could differ depending on the state. And I mean, it does provide an incentive in my mind, and something we've pushed for all along, is that fact sheets should be complete for everyone's sake, which is states should document what they're doing and how it protects water quality. And that'll make the permit more protected against appeal and more likely to meet any San Francisco requirements.
Go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, I'll just mention, I really don't want to speak for California specifically because each state is so different in their reasoning for why that particular language would be in there. I would just say that I think the point you made about if you're in the middle of either you have violations or potential violations or enforcement, I think it's important to note that there is going to be some pushback, especially if it's connected back to that language. And I think each facility in each state will have to work out whether they're interpreting that the decision is applying in a way that provides relief or not. But I do think there's going to be the gut reaction, especially in California in particular, just because the case was out there and there's a lot of conversations before this litigation went through and as it was going along and all the facilities were getting together talking. There's, this is a gut reaction to wanting some relief from the enforcement for the violations that may or may not now count as violations.
2 quick thoughts, and then we're going to take another question. And one is, I am from California, and I'll tell you, a big part of the conversation in California right now is there's probably authority under state law to continue using these kinds of permits, but if you're basing it on state law, you're opening a lot more permits to unfunded mandate claims. Because under state law, if you impose a mandate and don't fund it, that can be a problem under the California Constitution. And there are a lot of states that have mandate elements in their law or their constitutions. The other point is, to Fred's point about the specificity of the rationale, think about how this is going to work under general permits, which are often much less good at how they address site-specific settings.
The question right here, I know.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
please, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
We're running around, man. Yeah, go ahead.
So actually, I have sort of a 2-part question. So part 1 is, so are you reading the Supreme Court case narrowly about end of pipe restrictions, or more generally, or do you think it will be read more generally for any limitations where there's potentially a difference between what the facility in its discretion thinks versus the EPA? So for example, something as simple as do your annual evaluation and say if your BMPs are effective, right? Does the facility think they're effective, whereas EPA maybe thinks something different? Or do you think those are encompassed in the decision as well? And then part two is going back to the deference part of the conversation, is how do you think courts would allow for regulators like EPA to put out those broader restrictions when the statutes have sort of catch-all clauses like 402 that says to ensure compliance to the permit, the administrator can do any other requirements as he thinks appropriate, right? How do you judge deference for catch-all clauses under the new guidance?
To that first
Oh, sorry,
question.
Barack Hamelgard, EPA.
How about that first question about, hey, what if there's disagreement between the permit writer and the permittee about the sufficiency of some actions they've taken under a permit? Any thoughts?
I don't think that this decision really goes to that. What it goes to is the court was very clearly just saying, we're trying to interpret what the statute means in terms of what's a limitation, and determined that an end result requirement, as they constructed that concept, is not a limitation. So it doesn't really go toward the first issue you're talking about, which is if the agency and the party disagree on whether like BMPs are effective. The court seemed to be okay with BMPs. As Amanda said, that kind of thing they were okay with, even though it's narrative. The interesting question to come back to is, some of us would have liked them to decide it based on due process, in which case it's too fuzzy. Whatever the requirement is, it's too fuzzy. And therefore you don't know how to comply, in which case that might be more relevant if they had sort of spoken on that, might be more relevant to the issue you're talking about, but they didn't go there. Now, could that issue be raised in another permit? Yes. They didn't say anything about the due process issue, really. So to me, that means there could be due process issues raised in other permit appeals, which should go toward the general issue of, did we know what the agency intended in the requirement?
It might be helpful if I just read the sentence that kind of just is from the decision that is basically what the holding was. So Justice Alito wrote that the permit terms at issue were not permissible because they, quote, do not spell out what a permittee must do or refrain from doing. Rather, they make a permittee responsible for the quality of the water in the body of water into which the permittee discharges pollutants. So that was the problem in terms of what is a limitation.
I apologize. I forgot your second question. I usually punish people who ask multi-part questions, but do you all want to, I don't even remember. Do y'all want to react to your second point? I'm sorry. I don't know. Do y'all remember it?
Question is, how does hold on a second.
I'm sorry.
The question is, how does the new jurisprudence regarding deference apply to catch-all clauses like in 402 allowing the administrator to put any other requirements as it deems appropriate to ensure compliance? Like, how can you decide what is the right scope, essentially?
Well, now it means whatever the judge thinks it means. I mean, not to be glib, but it's up to the judge now.
So really, it goes back to another question, which is Congress wrote that language. And one might argue Congress intended to give the agency leeway by writing the word appropriate. And the court now, in essence, is saying, we're going to decide what appropriate means. Whereas Congress may have had, and a lot of us have lobbied Congress and helped develop language and know sometimes they're very purposely leaving things fuzzy, so they don't have to say what it means. And they can later say, and they can later complain when the agency interprets it a particular way. How is this going to change drafting laws going forward is a really good question, because here there's clearly language they intended to be fuzzy and to allow some judgment. And this court feels like there's one right answer. And I'm not sure what the right answer is going to be in terms of appropriate.
So just one thing to kind of build on Fred's point, one way one might read Loper Bright is a huge power grab by the courts for the courts. And so I think that speaks to your point. That's certainly how I might have read Loper. Right. So yeah, basically the courts get to decide, and the courts get to decide when it's a matter of law. So they get to decide when they don't want to decide too under Loper, right?
Bit, we're going to talk about residual designation and the idea of creating new stormwater permit requirements for a whole other class of dischargers. So Becky, I'm going to ask you if you could describe how some recent petitions to EPA have sought regulation of commercial, industrial, institutional, and maybe other stormwater discharges that are not currently directly regulated under permits. What do you think is going to happen? What kind of new permits might be forthcoming?
All right. It's kind of funny to me to include this in a hot topics panel because I've been working on this for 10 years. And this is where everybody says, but Becky, you look too youthful to be working on something for 10 years. So around 10, 15 years ago, a bunch of folks who work on stormwater, mainly in the environmental sector, but I would say some outside it as well, kind of started thinking about how the approach that had been dominant and still is of putting the entire regulatory burden of reducing stormwater from developed areas onto local governments through the MS4 program wasn't working out as well as everybody was hoping. There's kind of a mismatch where the local government is the regulated party, but they control the storm sewer system, but they don't control the most of the sites that are generating runoff that carries pollutants through that system into waterways. And so the ability of the MS4 entity, the permittee, to control the pollution was somewhat limited. So we decided to test out a different approach to see if this could be an alternative way forward based on a provision in the Clean Water Act in the stormwater permitting section that says that if a stormwater discharge or category of stormwater discharges is causing or contributing to a water quality violation, then it has to be permitted. And so NRDC, working together with some other groups, including American Rivers, shout out Gary, we filed a couple of petitions in 2015, literally 10 years ago, with a couple different EPA regions, mainly in Region 3 and 9, focusing on a couple of watersheds in Baltimore and Los Angeles, where the science was very clear that commercial, industrial, and institutional sites were generating large amounts of runoff that were causing water quality violations. And so we asked EPA to designate them for permitting. EPA denied those petitions, and the reason that it gave for doing so was that, it didn't dispute the science. It didn't dispute that those sites were causing problems. What it said was that it preferred to stick with the MS4 approach, and so for policy reasons was denying the petition. So NRDC challenged those responses in court, and in two different decisions, one in Maryland, one in California in 2018 and 2019, both courts found that that wasn't an acceptable response from EPA, and that if EPA or another permitting agency receives one of these petitions, the only question that they're allowed to consider is, are these discharges contributing to water quality violations? It's not allowed to consider other factors because the statute is crystal clear, no Chevron deference needed in that case. The statute's crystal clear that that's the only inquiry. So, so now it's been 5 years, 6 to 7 years since those cases. I don't know what year it is. And so now finally, just a couple months ago, EPA Region 9 finalized a designation in the Los Angeles watersheds, identifying the sites that now require a coverage under a general permit. It's commercial, industrial, and institutional sites with more than 5 acres of impervious cover. And the state is working on a permit. There's a draft permit that's out, but it's not final yet. In Region 3, there's still, it's been 6 or 7 years. They're still thinking about it. So I don't know what's going to happen under the new administration, but that's kind of the lay of the land. And I'm happy to answer questions or go into more, but I don't want to.
And I would just add, there was a similar petition in the New England region addressing watersheds in the Boston area and in New Hampshire. And in the case of the Boston ones, the EPA region has issued a draft designation decision to grant the petition, and they've simultaneously issued a draft permit, which is currently under public review.
Yeah, and that's I didn't mention those because those weren't my cases, but Conservation Law Foundation is the group that's been pushing that in New England.
So that's interesting, but you probably really want to know, how's this going to affect me? And so I'd ask the panel to maybe speculate a little bit. Would you care to venture what might happen in terms of finalizing permits under the existing petitions? Do you think you'll see more petitions?
Well, I mean, I think one interesting consequence is, a lot of the attention has been focused on like big box stores. That I think sort of figured, well, we'll just cover it under the MS4 permits, we're okay. And then this is sort of saying to them, no, you're not. And I have talked to some MS4 communities that have said, we're okay with this because we've had trouble regulating the big box stores. And maybe if they have their own permits, we don't have to be the ones that are under all the pressure to regulate them. Perhaps they will be regulated on their own, and that'll benefit our systems. So it's not necessarily something that an MS4 community should be afraid of, I would say, because it could end up actually helping them in dealing with big entities that they may not have the capacity, particularly lately, to adequately regulate.
On that point, in the Los Angeles designation that we've been working on, the plan is, once the permit is finalized for those sites, to transfer some of the TMDL burden that's currently on the MS4 to that permit. So the MS4s will actually have a lower TMDL requirement than it would have. So, we have been saying since day one, like, this is going to help MS4s. The politics of it are a little complicated. Not every city wants to go out there and say, like, yeah, regulate our businesses. So it's been challenging, even though it helps the city, to get them to say that out loud. But that's the intent.
It's going to feel about having another program to administer if this gets disseminated around the country.
So the conversation on RDA has been one we've been paying really close attention to. And I think in certain parts of the country, you'll find that they're embracing the idea in the sense that once the designations occur, they're sort of prepared to take on those programs, and especially if they're the permitting authority, and be responsible. I think in other parts of the country, they're still trying to wrap their heads around what they're going to do and how they're going to do it, and what's it buying them. I think philosophically, if you sort of step back and start at the 70s and you think about how big the NPDES program was back then, and then you fast forward today and how big the program is, it's massively expanded without the level of federal funds to support the program also massively expanding. So I think part of the question in any given state is this is going to take manpower to do, and am I getting the biggest bang for my buck by putting my resources here versus elsewhere? Obviously, once the designation occurs, it's now needs coverage. It needs permit coverage. So otherwise, third parties can come behind and come after the facilities themselves. So there's sort of recognition there. But I do feel like I also say that I think we were all sort of aware that by putting things under the NPDES program, you've gotten a lot of water quality benefit out of it. So with the massive expansion, you've also seen improvements in the water. So I don't really know from state to state where they're going to land, but I do think some of these bigger questions, like where's the funding coming from, how are we going to do everything, all of those things I think are really important issues that eventually have to be fleshed out, because you can't keep cutting the funding and just hoping to see more program success. And the other piece I'll just throw out there that's always sort of in the back of everyone's head, especially permit writers, is the last thing you ever want to do is be writing permits where the permittee will be out of compliance the day it's issued. Like, that is a really bad place to be, sort of scientifically, legally, politically. So there's sort of this sensitivity of wanting to make sure that, same thing with the standards, that you're not doing things that ultimately initially put people completely out of compliance. It may be the reality for some things, and you're forced down that path. But it is a real sensitivity, because with the violation comes a whole bunch of things that has to occur that isn't necessarily free, usually not free. Yeah.
We're going to take some questions, but I will share the fun fact that a bill was just introduced in the California legislature to require these new CII permits statewide in California. So it'll be interesting to see how that fares. Seth, do we have some questions?
Well, I've got my own question, as I've got a microphone, so I'm going to use it, kind of thing. But if someone else has a question, please. Okay, I got you. If anyone else hasn't had a chance to ask a question, then let me know too. Yeah, I know. If there's somebody else over there too. So my question is that I appreciate, Becky, that you can get a reduced TMDL, right? But doesn't that also open you, if you have a stormwater utility and you're getting revenue generated from those properties, doesn't that open you up to lawsuits saying that they have, they're exempt now, they don't, so you could lose revenue potentially in the stormwater utility? And I don't know if this ever come up, but that's something that just thinking about, anyway, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I expect it will come up. In theory, yes, I think municipalities where this is implemented might need to rethink how they structure their stormwater utility fee, because there might need to be an exemption carved in for sites that are directly regulated by their own permit and are not kind of counting on the MS4 to do the work for them. But I think that's fair. I think it's fair, especially if the MS4 ends up with a reduced requirement. Then I think that makes sense. I can, probably a lot of people might be wondering, like, what are these permits going to look like for these regulated sites? Just kind of as an example, the draft permit that's been put forward in the Los Angeles watersheds has 3 compliance options for sites it's a general permit, of course. And there's 3 compliance options. One is to contribute funding into a regional stormwater project. So that's kind of like maybe in lieu of paying a stormwater fee to the MS4, the site would be paying into a regional stormwater project. So that's one option. They alternatively can comply with a site-specific design standard. And in California, it's to retain the 85th percentile storm. And the third option is to meet on-site numeric effluent limits. It's hard to imagine any site would sign up for that one, but it's an option if they want it. So.
Becky, you alluded to this a little bit, and maybe option 1 in what you just referenced. Otherwise, I think I might be jumping ahead 1 or 2 steps around the topic of corporate water stewardship. Does this opportunity provide a little bit of a silver lining, or have you seen a silver lining start to appear where it allows corporations to really maintain and advance ESG goals in these sites and become partners in these efforts?
Probably. I'm not very familiar with ESG in general. But since most of the permittees are like private corporations, and this would require them to either pay into local environmental remediation projects or do more on site, it seems consistent with that. Some of the permittees are institutions, which is kind of that does tend to get glossed over a bit, and it gets a little weird there. When the institution's a public entity. For example, in the California designation that was just finalized, there were some areas carved out that were part of the port, the Los Angeles port, even though that's technically like institutional, but it's public land. So that's a kind of a tangent. Does that answer your question?
I'd like to hear what Fred would say. What would your clients say?
Well, right now, there's a lot of confusion about ESG and whether you ought to mention those letters. And one, like a company, if it said, okay, my choices are do stuff on site, which will cost me a lot of money to control stormwater on site, but that's like spent to do practical things, tangible things on site, easy to justify as compliance actions, or paying into a fund, and then I'll have some shareholder suing and saying, hey, I didn't give you money to spend on some other environmental project. If you want to spend it on site, I'm okay with that. but not if you're spending on something else not related to your property. So the company might actually choose to do the stuff on site and not open itself up to potential shareholder liability.
Thought about that one. You know, we got one or two other hot topics we'd like to hit if we can. We got about 20 minutes, so I think we can hit both of them. So let's move on. Since we solved all those other problems, let's talk about PFAS. What do you say? Sean, I'm going to ask you, and this is a hard assignment. A lot of stormwater managers have PFAS on their minds these days, given all these recent actions to maybe regulate PFAS and stormwater discharges under CERCLA, you know, the content of the multi-sector general permit draft and some associated litigation. Could you kind of summarize kind of what's happening with PFAS and stormwater, and just sort of see how you see those developments playing out in the near future?
And you said I have 2 hours? Is that?
Yeah, it's like 3.5 hours.
There are dedicated meetings to this topic. So as Dave and I were talking, I was like, well, this is probably way easier than trying to discuss the court decisions because, boy, they were unclear. And honestly, it's easy and it's hard because PFAS is super complicated and being sort of addressed at all kinds of different levels of government, down to the community level. And I just wanted to highlight a couple things that's been going on and then maybe open it up to questions, and then I'll fill in if there are questions that do that. But first off, I just want to say, if you haven't actually popped open EPA's strategic roadmap, I think it's a really great document for understanding how you'd address any new chemical that we all of a sudden realized, holy crap, this is having an impact on the environment and human health, and we need a plan going forward. It's really good about incorporating lots of different approaches, lots of different statutes to start to get at the problem. One of the things that also sort of mentions, and we're going to get back to this at the end of my presentation, is looking at polluter accountability, looking at the actual creators of the products and the places where there may be responsibilities to dispose of some of their products, and making sure those people are on the hook if there's potential environmental or human health harms. But I want to come back to that because I think the circle thing sort of raises some interesting concerns. So I'm going to mention two quick things. The National Monitoring for Unregulated Contaminants, which is a 2021 effort to basically get out to a bunch of drinking water facilities and say, hey, let's start figuring out where this is showing up and maybe in what concentrations. And it was really just to kind of get a handle on a problem we knew was happening. But if you think about the exposure pathways, ingestion, human health is probably a really big one to wrap our arms around really quickly. The other thing I'll just mention is the maximum contaminant levels in the drinking water program. Again, I do clean water programs. I don't do drinking water, so don't ask me any hard questions. But I just want to mention those two things. The maximum contaminant level, the MCL sort of gets it. Okay, now we need to treat this stuff now that we know it's there. And again, PFAS is not like one thing. It's thousands of things. And a lot of these efforts or initiatives are getting at a subset and a small subset of them. But hopefully those, like a lot of treatment technologies, it turns out that if you're treating a few things, it treats a lot of things. So I think that's part of the hope is that, and you can't really wrap your hands around the entire thing all at once. If you look at that strategic roadmap, the other thing it does a really good job is it tells you on a regular basis all the new stuff EPA is doing across all the different programs. So it's a great resource. It does mention the drinking water one. It mentions a bunch of things going on in the standards program, in particular 304A criteria with human health criteria and aquatic life. And I'm not going to say all of my folks at the state level agree with the approach and where EPA has landed on both the science and maybe the law in some places, but they do recognize that in order to implement things within the Clean Water Act, there are steps you have to take to get things to a place where you've got the scientific and legal certainty to keep taking further steps. I don't want to comment on any individual one of these efforts or initiatives, but just to say that we're aware and recognize the need for them, and we continue, like all of you probably, to provide feedback to EPA along the way for each sort of step and each sort of initiative. Effluent limit guidelines is a big place where we see opportunity. Of course, when you're working on the standard side with the criteria, those likely will end up in water quality-based effluent limits in some way, shape, or form. They end up in driving some of the assessment decisions, impairment decisions, TMDL stuff. But for the NPDES permits in particular, you've got the technology side, which is what the effluent limit guidelines are intended to try to help you with, the technology-based limits. We see there's several places where EPA is currently working on updating these effluent limit guidelines. I will say that that's one of Aqua's areas where we lean in a lot. We think there's a lot of effluent limit guidelines that can be updated for a lot of reasons. Obviously, PFAS is a driver right now for some of them, and it's really important that once those get in place, that the permit writers incorporate those into their new permits. I also mentioned that permits tend to be the place where you put monitoring requirements, especially if you're trying to get those permittees very involved in your process. So monitoring requirements, and this is NPDES wide, a lot of these things, but we'll get to stormwater here in a second. But because stormwater is a subset of the NPDES, it's important to sort of be aware of them. So when you look at the monitoring requirements, usually, you're looking for either detection, trying to find it and see it, and then you're looking for also like the load, the concentration, the amount that may be leaving the site. Mentioned analytic methods. We finally reached a place where states are feeling more comfortable with the method. It was in draft for the longest time, and there were some questions about where they were going to land, and I think we're happy that we've gotten where we got to. And then I'll also just mention the pretreatment program, which is, again, a sort of part of the NPDES program in a sense that it's out there. Facilities are getting, have expectations that are put on them so that they don't have downstream impacts to the local municipality, the local utility, POTW. All of which EPA has been working really hard to sort of set the national standards, and then states are incorporating as they become available and come final. And again, 304A is a great place to talk about it, NPDES as well. The EPA is setting the floor, they're setting the bottom. This is the minimum you got to do. A lot of states will make decisions and have been making decisions along the way with PFAS to do things more and faster under state law. So that's sort of a general overview of a lot of the stuff that's going on PFAS. Now I'm going to talk just a little bit about the MSGP. So the MSGP is the National Multi-Sector General Permit. This is a permit EPA issues where it is the permitting authority. That's 3 states, New Mexico, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and that's also territories, District of Columbia, tribal lands, some federal facilities. If you haven't read the draft, it has a whole list of places where the MSG would apply. The reasons why it's really important to the association is a lot of our states look at that national permit and use it as either a template or borrow from it, maybe even copy paste from it as a tool to sort of put in place the similar type permits, similar general permits in their own state. And we usually provide some feedback to EPA, recognizing that the 3 states where the permit is actually going to operate probably should be listened to the most because they're the place where it's going to definitely be applying to them. But also you're setting the sort of the standard, the tone, the baseline that a lot of people will look at when they're evaluating the state permit and how it compares to the national. So I'm just going to mention a couple of places in the MSGP where we kind of weighed in with specifically on PFAS. And I'll also mention, I actually thought this comment letter was going to go over to EPA on Friday, but they extended the deadline. Thanks for that, although we didn't ask, but thanks. And so for those that haven't weighed in, you still have time. So MSGP does have some expectations for PFAS. And let me just step back, and I should have said this at the very, very beginning. I think everybody agrees the best place to be addressing PFAS is at the source, like right there at the source. Unfortunately, if you let it out because of its persistentness, because of the way it is, it gets all over. So that's one of the challenges you're sort of dealing with the MSGP is you've got this situation where that industry, that facility might have a product, might have something going on that's causing a PFAS release to come off site. You also could have situations, because of the way stormwater works, it doesn't just stay on that one piece of land and come off, but you could have stuff flowing onto that facility. So one of the areas where we had sort of commented was it's really helpful when the permits sort of have a way to make sure that the permittee can assess on-site flow, on-site run-on that allows them to sort of make a note that, hey, this is not from our site, it's from a neighboring site. The more that's done in the permit, the more it's sort of helpful or put somewhere so the permittees have a clear path of maybe relief when it comes to monitoring, because monitoring is not going to be cheap. That's one of the concerns raised in our letters. One, the analytic method is sort of brand new. The labs are still getting sort of building capacity. And if all of the states implemented the MSGP as written with the frequency and duration of the monitoring for PFAS, it would likely overload the system. We just don't have enough labs and enough ability in the nation to do it at that level. Now, EPA may feel confident that for their sites and where they're permitting that they're going to have the capacity, but I do feel like the frequency and duration is something we're concerned about, making sure that there's enough lab capacity. Also, this idea has come up on the industry side that maybe once you're detecting the PFAS levels and you know you've got something coming off, that you can reduce the level amount of reporting, maybe even cease reporting. I think our folks are a little bit concerned, given that it's a bioaccumulative, and they really want to make sure they stay on top of how much is coming off site, because it's going to build up in the system. It's going to go other places, and it's not as simple as, well, the fate and transport, and it's going to break down in the environment. We don't have any worries. So there is a lot of support for continuing to think about that, recognizing that the frequency may not have to be at the same level of EPA in order to be able to track and keep track of it and make sure that you're keeping it on it, or maybe it's even more depending on the site and how much.
I'm going to interrupt you.
Yes.
That was a lot.
Yes.
So I'm going to ask the panelists before.
Oh, yeah, we got time. Thanks.
Before a little bit. Before we go to your questions, I just want to ask the panelists, what advice would you have for stormwater managers to anticipate some of these future regulatory directions on PFAS? You're managing a facility. What should you be thinking about?
So one of the things that we've gotten a lot of questions from folks about, like, should we do testing? And should we take other actions to address PFAS? And going back to the point Sean raised about source control, one of the things that we've found in the EPA roadmap frustrating is the lack of prioritization. It's a checklist of a lot of things they want to do. There's no sense of what are the things that are actually going to make a difference. And for example, they put out human health water quality criteria. They're in the parts per quadrillion. So nowhere in the country will a body of water meet those numbers, and nowhere will they be attainable. So we're all going to ask for variances. It's probably statewide variances. So what's the point of that? Adopting standards that can't even be measured, and then everybody's going to want variances. That doesn't strike us as a particularly productive line of action, whereas if one were to try to promote the types of programs, say, Michigan has done, where their pretreatment programs have yielded significant success by going to facilities and saying, what are the materials you use that might contain PFAS, like fume suppressants for platers? Let's talk about PFAS-free fume suppressants, because there are ones available. Gee, we see a significant drop in the PFAS loadings from that POTW. Okay, same thing in terms of stormwater is, can we look at potential sources of PFAS, besides the fact that it's in the air and it's in the rain? So putting tight limits on stormwater there doesn't make a lot of sense, but can we talk about reducing the sources? And even say at industrial activities, if you're reducing the products that have PFAS, you're also going to be reducing the levels in stormwater from your industrial areas. So to us, that type of program and promoting those types of programs, which are very plant specific, but there are good management practices that can be followed, and substitution of inputs that can be worked through with the plants, with the facilities, seems as those are the kind of things that agencies, including EPA, would be well put to promote, which would actually make a real difference in terms of loadings.
The one quick thing I'll add, I don't disagree with anything that Fred just said, but we have been hearing from a number of utilities, surprisingly enough, that for a number of them, their biggest sources of PFAS are coming in from domestic sources, which cannot be touched with the pretreatment program. Obviously, that's not the case when you're like right downstream from Lake Comores, like not them, but a lot of other larger utilities, that's actually the issue. And so that's causing huge problems, particularly in the CERCLA context, where you've got this liability coming on you. And the other thing that I would note with CERCLA to keep in mind is I think everybody thinks that that's a polluter pays model. We would say it's not, partially because of the useful products exemption. We are pretty concerned that a lot of the actual polluters, as in the chemical companies, are not actually going to have a lot of liability under CERCLA. So that's just something that I'll throw out there.
A break in a minute. We've been with a lot of stuff. But you want to hang in there for one or two questions?
Got one right here.
Hi, my name is Dunia Drias. I'm a student at the George Washington University. And I just had a quick question about PFAS, because that's something I've been learning about recently in one of my classes. My question is, do you expect PFAS to be integrated into MS4 permit requirements on a national level? Because I know some states have started to implement it slightly. And if so, how would you say that, I guess, local government could prepare, or what kind of legal changes would we see?
Anybody want to dive in
Question.
on that one? Think about the municipal permittees. Becky, please.
There was an EPA memo from a couple years ago that kind of addressed this on integrating PFAS requirements into different kinds of permits, and it touched on MS4 permits briefly. The only recommendation I believe it included was to incorporate requirements on firefighting foam because that's a major source of PFAS that the municipality itself can actually control, as opposed to all the different third parties within the municipality. So I think it said, you should not use it for anything other than firefighting and clean it up as soon as you use it. But that's all I've seen, and I wouldn't be surprised if that memo was rescinded, frankly, by the new administration. It could be.
But Becky, just to clarify, so it was like a spill prevention type of thing. Is that what you're saying?
No, it was a MS4 permitting
Okay.
memo.
I mean, spill prevention.
Oh,
aspect of a permit.
as that section of the
Right,
permit?
yeah.
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah, I think we'll.
Oh, Fred.
I think you're going to start seeing it. Excuse me.
Almost time for a break. Go ahead, Fred.
I do think we'll start seeing it in permits. Along the lines of that memo. Some of the challenges are, for example, you may have runoff from industrial facilities that use AFFF. Our experience has been working with companies, including chemical companies, petroleum refineries, et cetera, that if they tend to value not having explosions and fires more than they value changing to an unproven product. And so that we have a lot of resistance to, hey, we're using the stuff that best puts out fires at petroleum refineries so they don't blow up. And that's a good thing. And then you're saying not only shift chemical, shift to entirely different application system. Okay. The PFAS-free products, you have to junk your old system, put in a new system using new chemicals that haven't yet been proven to work quite as well as the ones that keep you from exploding. So that takes a while. And DOD even has delayed the requirements for their bases. So you have to acknowledge that technology improvement can take a while before you get products that are as effective in preventing really bad things.
Yeah, I'll just add, I do feel like it's really important, I think, to states to be able to know, even if they don't have a standard in place, what the contributions of PFAS are going to be to the watershed. So I can't imagine municipalities will be off the hook for at least monitoring and keeping track of how much. Like that's, even if there's no standard in place, even if the 304 criteria isn't being used by the state, I think every place where they have a regulatory hook and they can require some monitoring is probably going to see some monitoring.
Yeah, that was the last word, except for this last word, which is, I think we're saying change is coming. Some of it's related to legal stuff. And thank you for hanging in there. Thank you to our panelists for a really great panel, I thought. Thank you for your questions. Let's go to a break.
And for folks in the room, there's coffee that's been delivered. So if you want to, we're going to take a 15-minute break for those online. We're going to be just milling around here in the room. We're going to come back in 15 minutes. So 3 o'clock Eastern time, we're going to start up again. So stretch your legs or whatever you're doing online too. Thanks.
All right. Everyone ready for the rest of the afternoon? All right. Next up, we have the federal and state update. And my name is Pat Bradley. I work for Michael Baker International. Our panel, and it's going to be a little different than the last one in that we're going to do, Chris will cover what's going on at EPA headquarters in the NPDES program. Michael will talk about funding, and then Zach will talk about what's going on in Maryland. So we'll do them individually. We'll take questions after each presentation, and then we'll wrap up with questions at the end. Okay? So first up, we have Chris Kloss. Chris is the director of the Water Permits Division in US EPA's Office of Water. He oversees the National NPDES permitting program, key element in EPA's Clean Water Program. The Water Permits Division develops national policy and works with EPA and state permit writers to administer the permitting program for 750,000 permittees nationwide. The division also implements voluntary programs related to animal agriculture, green infrastructure, and integrated planning. And the division's responsibilities require collaborating with a broad swath of federal, state, local, industry, and environmental groups. So, Chris.
All right, thanks, Pat. Thanks everybody for having EPA here today, and Michael will talk about the fun money side after I think I do my bit, but always appreciate the invitation to be here and talk about what we've got going on. I wanted to go over just a couple of updates that we had, some things that have percolated over the last year, some things that are updates from when we were here last year. The first one I want to talk about is the Stormwater Centers of Excellence grants. When we were here last year, I think they were out on the street. The RFP was out. We have gotten the applications in, and we have made awards for those in the fall. We've awarded 2 of those grants. So the legislation that we got from Congress directed EPA to set up these centers of excellence to do stormwater research on technical and policy questions. So we've established 4 centers of excellence across the country, and then there's 1 national clearinghouse. So the Center for Watershed Protection is both one of the recipients for the centers of excellence and also the national clearinghouse. Their grant money has gone out. The other 3 for University of New Hampshire, University of Oklahoma, and the Regents Board of Nevada Higher Education System, those are still in process. We've gone through the work plans with those folks, and we've actually moved those products over to the folks in the agency that actually award money. We do the technical piece, and then we give it over to them. So we are hopeful that those 3 grants will be going out soon. The total award value for those was $5 million, and that was a combination of fiscal year 23 and 24. We're still taking a look at FY25 money. This was a little bit of a different year in appropriations. So we're seeing what's in the CR for the remainder of the year to see if we have additional money to put out an RFP for additional work on that. So that's something that we're really excited is getting stood up. And, we got a lot of questions about that last year. And, there's a lot of partnerships in that. I mentioned the lead organizations for those grants, but there's a lot of partnerships amongst those teams that we're really excited to see the work product that comes out of those centers as they go forward. One of the other things that was interesting for us as well, and just hats off to organizations like National Municipal Stormwater Association and WEF. Clean Watersheds Need Survey came out last year, and this will dovetail a little bit with the work that Michael does. That was the first time, I think, in a number of years that we had put out the need survey. Over $630 billion, I think, of identified needs, but I think importantly, about $115 billion identified for the stormwater sector. I think this was, I know there was a lot of effort to get states to report what their needs were for the MS4s. And, one of the things that I know Michael and his folks have worked on a lot over the years is talking with their counterparts at the state about eligibilities for stormwater programs, not only the pipes and conveyance systems, but also green infrastructure. And I think the split was about 40-60 on green versus gray needs that were identified. So that was pretty interesting to see those type of data coming back to us. And just, I know one of the stated goals of the stormwater sector out in practitioners was, elevating stormwater to the same level as wastewater and drinking water. And I think we're seeing that more and more every year as we're getting new data in, the needs, and just the maturation of the program as well. So one of the things that, we also highlight is how much money has gone in. And I know that a lot of comments come back that we have a lot to do on the stormwater side of the house, but I think there's been a lot of good progress, and that's reflected in the data that have been reported by you all as well. Also, last year, we put out a big toolkit that we have around long-term stormwater planning. This is part and parcel of what we've been doing with integrated planning. So that's something that we've been doing for over a decade now. That was a framework that EPA developed that Congress actually codified in the Clean Water Act, which basically says that you as a municipal permittee, if you want to take a look at what your highest need priorities are, wastewater versus stormwater, talk to your permitting authority and let's see how we can permit that over a longer term to address your most pressing needs first. The framework, I think, has been used a lot in CSO communities that have, obviously stormwater needs in addition to some of the CSO needs. When we talk about long-term stormwater planning with our group, the coordination often, if you're an MS4 only, that coordination goes amongst departments, right? Like how do you engage with your Department of Transportation or Parks to do stormwater as you're doing these longer term projects? Sometimes it's not, if you don't have a CSO, sometimes the utility has got a good hand on, what their issues are. But we see the complementarity between the different, municipal agencies within that local government. So take a look at those tools. We piloted some of those concepts with 4 communities around the country and tried to put out some tools that we thought were transferable. We've done a lot of work with Sean and his folks at the state level to see what would be helpful for them as the permitting authority, and also the local communities, if you want to develop a long-term stormwater plan or integrated plan, how to take those ideas to your permitting authority. And then the last thing I just wanted to mention before we jumped into the question session was just general permits. Sean mentioned our multi-sector general permit that is out for public comment right now. The comment period did get extended to May 19th, I believe, is the end date. I think Sean did a good job of touching on like the some of the updates that we have. A lot was around the PFAS sampling that we included this time around for comment. We're very interested to hear the feedback on that. That sampling was in alignment with the 2022 guidance that we put out for PFAS and NPDES permitting, really trying to get a look at where the sources of PFAS are coming from. So we have included quarterly monitoring, that's indicator monitoring, what we call it. So it's not a limit, it is just gathering that information. And we do make a distinction between industrial sources and municipal sources. And I think the last panel who, I'll just say Amanda, Fred, Sean, and Becky, folks we talked to a lot. I think they did a fabulous job kind of covering the topics and all the nuances to that. But what I will say dovetails with that is, as an agency, we really are interested in getting upstream of the PFAS issue. We realize that MS4s, public utilities, all these folks are kind of importing it. And we really want to try to get to where it's discharged at the source. And sometimes that requires monitoring just so we know where it is. And so where you see it in MS4 permits around the country, we really are trying to get a signature of the discharge. Can we see hotspots within a locality? But the difference with the MSGP, that is industrial sources, and we have suggested and requested comments on industries that we think are known or suspected of having PFAS in their manufacturing process. And we'll see what the comments look like when we get back from that. And then lastly, on our construction general permit, we're getting ready to start the reissuance process for that. That expires in early 2027. Keep an eye out. We are getting ready to sign a modification in the very near future to recognize lands of exclusive federal jurisdiction. So it's not really going to impact folks here in the room, but we needed to modify. There are certain areas of the country, like national parks, other areas that we did not include in the eligibility criteria that have some projects going on where we're the exclusive permitting authority for that. So if you see a modification, it doesn't change the terms of the permit. It is literally just to expand the eligibility areas. With that, I'll kind of stop there. Those are our biggest updates for now, and see what else we got.
Anybody have questions? I remember, got to wait for the microphone to come around. No questions for Chris. Okay, I got one question. So last year, if I remember right, well, start off with, if you look at the ask document, one of the things we're looking towards is, market-based incentives, so trading, things of that sort. Is trading still on the list of things to get done?
We, in complete fairness, we haven't had a chance to brief the new political team coming in. You'll see market-based rulemaking. I anticipate it'll still be in the reg agenda, partly because, although the agency, I think we have guidance on trading all the way back to about 2003, so it's about 2 decades old now. We'll see, what the overall agenda looks like for the new folks coming in, but we would be hopeful that there would be an opportunity to further support trading mechanisms, which we have long supported as part of NPDES implementation.
Chris, can you tell us a little bit about the green infrastructure programs? What do you see as the future of them, and any impacts or updates?
Thanks for the question. I think we've had a green infrastructure program since about 2008 at the agency, and it's really evolved as a really partnership program amongst not only the states, but the local, not only the municipalities, but the utilities, and then a lot of academic organizations as well, just to raise awareness about what I would say is the evolving nature of stormwater management that takes a look at both natural systems and gray systems to figure out how they need to work in complementarity in urban environments, right? To get the maximum performance that we can. And I think what we've learned from engaging with stakeholders over the past, almost 2 decades is really the viability of these systems and the interest in using them. And so from our program, we've really tried to not only incorporate into things like integrated planning, long-term stormwater planning, but ask about how we can really enhance how we do the permitting program to recognize approaches like that. And we've also used that as a model for different things like real-time controls, where you can have smart sewers and different ways to optimize the performance of your overall infrastructure system. We used to joke that at one point we wouldn't have a green infrastructure program. It would just be infrastructure, and it would just be like one of the pick menus. But we still, we've got a team working at it in our division that continues to do a lot of engagement and training on that.
Can't help myself, Chris. Sorry. Among the 5 pillars that the administrator has articulated is an interest in permitting reform, and maybe streamlining might have been a term that they used. I know you haven't briefed up all this stuff, but would you care to speculate on what kinds of efforts might be undertaken to look at improving permitting within the context of the existing statute and rules?
Sure. I think folks are aware that our friends over in the Office of Enforcement and Compliance have been working on e-reporting for a while. And I think that there will be a lot of opportunities in the future to leverage getting data electronically. And I think that will help streamline what we do on the NPDES side of the house. I think some of it is coordination. We'll talk with Sean a lot about, what the states need as far as streamlining. We'll try to get our house in the best order that we can. But I anticipate that we'll try to rely on some of those efforts to see where not only are data reported, but where we can use that on the front end to help streamline the process. And, part of it is the last panel, I think, kind of unpacked a lot of the challenges we have before us. Right when we try to streamline, then we've got some additional things that we have to think about around queue bells and things like that. So, it's always like trying to change the tire on the bus, or whatever the saying is. But as we go through, that's what we're balancing, is permit and program integrity versus efficiencies. We certainly want to get permits out as quickly as we can. And I think one of the strong suits of the program, not only here, but at the state level, is, general permits. You can get a lot of efficiency gained by that. When we get our construction general permit out, you got coverage in 14 days when you submit a notice of intent. That is a model that we want to continue to reflect. And then I'll say, but, we'll pause a little bit. you didn't ask me specifically about San Francisco, but I did want to compliment Amanda on an excellent description of the court case. And I would say that for that one in particular, a lot of the press was around the end result limitations and obviously the prohibition on us using those. But one of the things that we found very beneficial in that case was the express direction to continue to use narrative limits and BMPs, especially for the stormwater sector and general permits. We think that was a very important piece of the opinion as well. But we'll have to digest that as we take a look at the permits that we have in the hopper and that we're getting out as well.
Other questions for Chris?
I think we've got one over here. I'm like Donahue, I'm dating myself, calling myself Donahue. I guess you got it.
I'll come around so I don't have to look through the pillar here. One thing I always looked at is feedback loops and understanding. And with our data collection, are we looking at trying to promote, push that out back to the community so we can learn more about how things are working? Is that a possibility in the future?
Yeah, and if you haven't had a chance to take, I'll just use our multi-sector general permit as an example, right? A couple years ago, as part of a settlement agreement, we handed the National Research Council kind of the keys to the permit and said, can you make some recommendations for us? And one of the things that they asked us to do and recommended was including more sampling and enough sampling results that we could do some statistical analyses on them. So we could actually have a more data-focused approach to when we required monitoring and what we were going to get out of it. So I think this is what we're trying to do, especially with PFAS or any emerging contaminants. You know, I think that especially as we are very sensitive to the concerns of the municipal sector about liability and who should be cleaning up some of these pollutants that are, you know, harder to deal with, and we don't have all the tools in place to get to them just yet. That is something that we really want to do, and we want to share that back. And we've actually gotten that question from some of the municipal stormwater agencies, like, why are you making a sampling for PFAS? It isn't that we're looking to, you know, make the municipalities responsible. It's that we just need to know where it is and kind of adjust to it.
Questions for Chris? I'll make one pitch and go back to the San Francisco thing. A clear definition of end result, since that was a new made-up phrase. It's not in any of the NPDES guidance. So
we will adapt. The Supreme Court has given us functional equivalent, which we hadn't had before, and now we have end results. So we will incorporate that into our direction. And I like to think that we're good at thinking on our feet. And obviously, we will, you know, implement what they've given us as part of their opinion.
Functionally equivalent end result. Got it.
Hey, Pat, can I ask a quick question? I'm over here. I know, voice of God over here. Yeah, I know that there's been an, I can't remember, well, the Waters of the U.S. is, the rulemaking is going to happen. Is there a timetable for that? I can't remember. Maybe it's already laid out and I just haven't read through it myself. So, but
I don't know Waters of the U.S. Timetable for that. I know, I agree. I think they've announced it, but I don't know exactly what will be involved or timeline.
Somebody, yeah, I should know. You're right. So go ahead.
Federal Register notice had, I guess there's going to be public meeting or something coming up very shortly, but see where it goes from there. All right. Thank you, Chris. Next up, we have Michael Dean. Michael Dean is chief of the Clean Water State Revolving Fund Program with US EPA. Prior to returning to EPA, he was executive director of the National Association of Water Companies, and from 2006 to 2009, he was associate assistant administrator for water in the EPA, where he played a key role in developing and implementing national water policy. Before that appointment to EPA, Michael served as an executive at water management companies, including Suez and Veolia, where he focused on innovative financing and infrastructure policy. Michael.
Thank you, Pat. And thanks, WEF and EMSA for inviting us to be here today. I already have one takeaway from the afternoon. I decided that next time I'm on a session with Zach and with Chris, I need to wear fancier socks. I'm just... So again, I'm going to talk about EPA's water infrastructure financing for stormwater, the principal programs. I run the Clean Water State Revolving Fund program, which is well positioned to address water quality excuse me, water quality issues. I'm not going to start over. That caused by stormwater runoff through financing of both gray and green infrastructure. And the CWSRF program can be paired well with the sewer overflow and stormwater reuse municipal grant program, a mouthful, which we call OSG for overflow and stormwater grants. So I'll be talking about the OSG program, which I think you're all familiar with. And both these programs provide funding for the planning, design, construction for overflow stormwater, and in the case of SRF, substantially other types of wet weather and non-point source projects as well. I will not touch on another financing program which I have the pleasure to run, which is the congressional earmark, what we call community grants session. Actually, it is very relevant to some of the stormwater because it is one of our biggest challenges in the community grants earmark program is what's a viable stormwater project versus a flood control project. So we can kind of get into that if you want, if anyone's interested in obtaining a congressional earmark for a stormwater project. But the eligibilities are quite broad for clean water SRF. Certainly, municipal utilities, cities, counties, governmental entities, depending on the state, lots of private and not-for-profit groups as well, community groups, homeowners associations, even individuals are kind of eligible under the Clean Water Act. Not every state has all those types of eligibilities, but certainly for the stormwater, the municipal groups and utilities are really the focus. Although once you kind of get outside urban areas, we do see more interest in, some of the wet weather, green infrastructure type of things that NGOs and other groups are involved with as well. OSG is much more limited. It's municipalities and municipal entities that are eligible. I think all aware. First of all, there's the different project types. It's, like I said, for planning, design, costs, including municipality-wide stormwater management planning. Certainly, the treatment works to address stormwater runoff and treatment, gray and green infrastructure. Once you get into stormwater itself, certainly to manage, reduce, treat, or recapture stormwater or subsurface drainage water, and very important, I think, reusing or recycling stormwater or subsurface drainage water as well. I won't get into some of the particular types of projects. I think you're probably aware of them, but again, all the way from, as I said, planning, design, street sweeping for stormwater, water quality control, all sorts of eligibilities. Clean Water SRF's been around since 1988. We have $181 billion of assistance out there during this time, over 50,000 assistance agreements, many of which are non-point source. They're much smaller, but I think well over half of those are actually smaller non-point source projects versus some of the larger utility type of projects. Last year alone, FY24, we had $9.4 billion of assistance provided, of which about 169 million was for stormwater gray infrastructure and 96 million for stormwater green infrastructure. We've had interesting, good discussions over the years with both WEF and NMSA about some of the past data for providing, particularly under the Green Project Reserve. But we've really firmed up, partly because of the work and the information you all have given us, has kind of firmed up the last couple of years. So we're pretty confident about the numbers in certainly FY24 last year when you're talking about the gray and green stormwater infrastructure numbers. OSG, much smaller program, unlike the SRF, which is, as you know, is grants to states that then provide a match and then provide loan assistance. The OSG program is a direct grant program. EPA provides grants to states, which then turn around to subrecipients and fund, whether it be cities or other municipal type of entities for their projects. 2020 is when it got underway. Since 2020, we've received appropriations about 243 million, so much smaller, but certainly not a small program. The appropriations just passed for FY25 include $41 million, which we'll start working on allotting to the states now as well. States come in and they can identify the projects that they intend to fund, or they can wait to identify the projects they intend to fund through that program. Since we began, we've awarded over $152 million to states, 47 states total. 3 states have yet to receive their first grant. We've gone back and forth a little bit with the Inspector General's office on this. It's a relatively small program, and some states have chosen to kind of wait and roll 2 or 3 years with the grants into one to get a larger number, because administrative costs of the smaller grants are the same, so they'd rather kind of wait and take a grant all at once. So we've seen a little bit of delay in some cases, but again, we feel pretty comfortable. We've got 75% of the money out so far. In the past year, we've also provided to 3 states, Missouri, Texas, and Montana, technical assistance. We had contract support for both applying for the grant and trying to identify projects that are viable for the grants as well. In many cases, we mix and match these dollars. The SRF funding and OSG funding go very well together, as well as some others as well. So encourage people to not just kind of look at what you're going to do with the potentially relatively small amount of grant funding from the OSG program, but how can you align that with low interest loans from the Clean Water SRF program to make a project perhaps more affordable, through the additional grant funding. Chris mentioned the needs survey. We're very pleased. The needs survey we did for 2022, which was released in the report to Congress of May of 2024. We made a very concerted effort to increase the stormwater representation in that. From 2012 was the previous stormwater or previous needs survey before 2020, so it was 10 years. And we did see the stormwater needs up 91.5 billion, so up to 115 billion, as Chris mentioned as well. If you're trying to, he also mentioned really working the states and encouraging you all to identify those needs and get them reported. We're starting to plan for the next one, which will be 4 years. Tangibles probably start collecting in 2 years. Just kind of, if you want competition, states with the highest reported needs, just if anyone's here and wants to cheer, it's Virginia, California, Florida, Massachusetts, and Michigan. Definitely had the highest reported needs. In some cases, put a really big effort into identifying those needs. States with the largest per capita needs were Virginia again, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Mexico, and Colorado. So again, we were very pleased. We received, I think, stormwater from almost all the 51 respondents. Actually, there are more than 51 respondents, including territories. There's 56. So it's the first time ever in the history of the needs survey that all eligible entities report at least some needs. So in addition to our funding programs, I think it's very important to articulate the resources that we have within the Office of Wastewater Management at EPA for those interested in stormwater financing. So we have the Water Finance Centers, which is also in the Water Infrastructure Division, which has a plethora of resources. First of all is the Water Finance Clearinghouse, which is a easily navigable web-based portal for looking not just for stormwater, but all other sources of funding as well. And I think stormwater is probably the most robust part of that. I think I forget exactly how many case studies are in there, but a lot of work has gone into identifying options for municipalities and others to go online. We also have a very robust learning module within that as well to learn what their financing opportunities are. So this goes all the way from these financing programs to state financing programs to setting up stormwater utilities, and all the other things we need to do to make sure that not only is there money available from funding programs, but there's revenue available to pay for, particularly when you're talking about loan programs. And how do you layer in different sources of funding, perhaps? Maybe there's 5 sources of funding that come into this: the SRF loans, OSG grants, other types of grants as well. So I encourage you to look through that. And then also importantly, EPA has technical assistance through our Water TA program that's focused on stormwater financing. This TA assistance provided by EPA can help develop long-term stormwater management plans. It can perform asset management and implement asset management plans, as well as looking at technical, managerial, and financial capacity building for stormwater utilities or municipalities as well. So again, when I spoke, I think Hartford at the West Stormwater Committee meetings were up in Hartford last May, I think, or so, and I was quite struck by the people who did not know the resources available under the funding programs to the Water Finance Center. So I encourage you to do that. And I told Travis, I'm going to call Travis Ostrom. He's in the back of the room over here. He's our stormwater expert in the Water Finance Center. So he's a great resource for all of you. And I'm not sure I can get to Wundergarten, but I think Travis may get there, so you can try to corner him and over a cocktail perhaps, and or beer if it's Wundergarten, and get some more information. But again, please reach out to us. And again, in addition to our funding programs, I want to make sure you avail yourselves of all the other resources we have available that are not necessarily fairly focused. So thank you very much, and happy to take any questions or comments or questions about earmarks.
Questions, anybody?
Steve's got one.
I'll be nice, I promise. So Michael, on OSG, it's my recollection, the way it generally works is the state submits to EPA what they want funding for, and you award a grant for it. In the requests you're receiving from the states, have you done much analysis about what kinds of things are getting funded? Are stormwater, is it getting a proportional amount of funding? Is it relative to the part of the country they're in, you know, the Northeast getting more than the West? As well as, is it, what I've heard a little bit is that some states have used it to make projects, SRF funded projects or other projects that are getting funding from the state meet the affordability criteria. So it's being used a little bit to help address affordability challenges. Have you seen some of that stuff? Or what do you got to share with us?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I think that we're seeing that because it's in many states it's a relatively small amount of money. Is that buying that affordability piece for an otherwise funded either SRF low interest loan or again, I didn't mention the SRF additional subsidization, as we call, which is essentially forgiven principal or grant-like assistance. You know, the numbers last year were, you know, not small as far as I think last year we had 860 million of additional subsidization. You know, I don't always like to peg, and I had a conversation just before the session, is that I don't always want to put stormwater in the category of it can't pay. There's no revenue to pay for it, right? We need to find a way of stormwater utilities and paying for it. You can't just say stormwater, it doesn't have wastewater utility fee. We need a grant, and that's the only answer. There's an opportunity for using grants very strategically, but I think we need to figure out how to finance, not just fund stormwater, and you to kind of quantify, monetize the benefits of stormwater management in a way that they can be paid. So I do encourage people to kind of look at it that way, is don't just say we just want the OSG grant. If the OSG grant can extend the reach of clean water SRF further, I'd like to see that. As far as breakdown between, like, so say, for example, overflow or stormwater, I don't have that now. We are preparing a long overdue report to Congress on the program. I'm trying to recall whether we try to capture some of that in there as well. But we are also looking at, in addition to the technical assistance, we also are the contractors working some case studies for us. So it's more kind of examples rather than an entire inventory, I think, of how it can be used effectively in various types of uses.
Hi, Susan Sullivan with NUIPIC. I'm struck by your comment about how we pay. I had a board meeting 3 weeks ago, I guess, and one of my commissioners from Massachusetts challenged all of us to actually find a way to get the public to support stormwater fees, whether you want to make a district, whether you want to have a rain tax, whatever. And I know we're all working in the room to move forward some of these issues, but I think new technologies are great. We can put them in this one spot. We can do all this stuff, but I don't even know. Did anybody tally up the money that people talked about today? Because it was like at least $1 zillion. We're never, ever, ever going to have enough money. So it strikes me, why aren't we as a group working harder to have, I don't know, some kind of campaign to get people to understand that you have to pay for dirty water, stormwater. I'm a big fan. And I think, Zach, your state was one of the ones with a rain tax, right? And so I'm intrigued by why aren't we doing it and how is it working for you? I guess that's a two-part question. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll have Zach run about the rain tax. No, it's an interesting question, and you're all close to it. And again, the conversation I was having out here just before, I used I live in Alexandria, Virginia, which is a home of WEF, and it's like I was making this point. All my neighbors kind of know what I do and whatnot. And a few years ago, when we put a stormwater fee on, which I think started at like $12 or something, and these are people with $1 million or more homes all over the place in Old Town Alexandria that have no idea what the wastewater bill is. But when they heard they had to pay $12 for stormwater, it's just like, oh my God, what's going on? And it's just that, again, it's not an affordability issue because they don't even know what they pay for water. I'm guessing to a large extent, but it's just the concept of paying for stormwater. So there's a huge education that I think is needed, that it is have a water quality impact. You know, it's working out, and I will put Alex Renew has done a great job with their with their tunnel project of really educating people of, you know, what happens to the Potomac River, where everyone likes to recreate by, and now there's restaurants on in Old Town. It's like, yeah, you know, some things you don't want in that water, and you have to pay for it. So, do you want to try to answer, or if we're done, maybe you can start going.
Well, yeah. So if by the rain tax you mean the bay restoration fee, we have a $60 per household fee in Maryland, which has been wildly successful, both in terms of being accepted by households in the state and being put to good use. And so, I mean, that's generating, you know, I won't quote the exact number because I don't have it in the back of my mind, but it's been essential to, I mean, most of it's been applied to wastewater infrastructure, but a number of those are CSOs, and some of the bigger systems in the state, as well as a lot of the smaller systems. And now I think it's every wastewater system on the Chesapeake Bay but one has had a significant upgrade because of that program. And so one of the conversations we're having in the state now is, so half of that fee is designed to sunset because it's a debt service fee. But the question is, to your point about, like, if we can prove the value, it's a lot psychologically easier for people to continue paying something that they're already used to paying and feeling like they're getting some value for. So what else could we use that other half of the fee for? If the legislature was convinced not to let it sunset, what else could we do with that? Is that something that could go to stormwater, that could go to MS4s, that could go to a range of other adjacent uses that haven't been met? In addition to, and one of the things I was going to talk about was, you know, the more we make these investments in upgraded, modernized infrastructure, at some point they are no longer new. And, you know, it is the case that we now have, you know, modernized infrastructure that's 20 years old and is requiring already, you know, upgrades and investment and you know, more than just the usual annual maintenance. So, but to your point, I think it's absolutely essential to have that public campaign. And I really do applaud, you know, WEF and NLC and NACO and lots of, you know, the organizations here for keeping that drumbeat up in Washington. I know I've been a part of those conversations for many years, but that doesn't always filter down to the local level where these, you know, where these fees are most frequently needed. So, so yeah, it's work that needs more progress.
Said, before I joined Michael Baker, I worked for the city of Richmond, Virginia, and back in, I guess it's around 2013 or so, we created the RVA H2O program, and the main reason was to get people educated on, you know, water across the city with a heavy focus on stormwater. And we actually put out a survey, and we're amazed at what people, just the misconceptions about stormwater. They didn't realize that, you know, when they dropped stuff in the street, it ended up in the James River because of the stormwater system. That just did not enter their mind. It went down a gutter, it went in a drop inlet, and it disappeared. So that was kind of but we set up a stormwater utility in 2009 in order to fund taking care of the stormwater program. And I'm, you know, kind of with you, Susan, amazed at the pushback on putting together utilities for stormwater. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But all right, enough of that. Thank you, Michael. Now, Zach. So Zachary Schaefer was appointed Assistant Secretary at the Maryland Department of the Environment in January 2025, where he leads policy work across the state's water, air, land, and environmental infrastructure finance programs. At the department, he supports work to address long-term stormwater and surface water program planning, infrastructure development, and maintenance and achievement of Chesapeake Bay water quality goals. Prior to that, he served as Director for Policy at the U.S. EPA's Office of Water, where he supported a broad range of EPA priorities, including infrastructure modernization, PFAS, climate resilience, cybersecurity, and more. Zach has worked for more than 15 years at the intersection of policy and politics in the infrastructure, climate, energy, and labor arenas. Zach.
Thanks, Pat, and thanks to WEF and to the partners here for inviting me to join. It's good to be back in my DC world. So again, I'm Zach Schaefer, Assistant Secretary at the Maryland Department of the Environment. But please be kind with your assessment of my state perspective. I've only been in the role for about 60 days. Prior to that, I served alongside these two excellent colleagues at EPA, and to the extent that I've ever said anything brilliant, it's because of the brilliant work that they and their teams have done, and I know continue to do. But I am now at a state agency, and it's been an enormous education. I was just talking to some folks before the session started about how blisteringly fast things happen at the state level by comparison to my federal experience. And just in the 90 days, in the 90-day session that ends today in Maryland, I've been a part of bills that had yet to be conceived and were designed and then have already either succeeded or failed. So all that is to say, there's a lot of really exciting and interesting work that is happening at the state level and will continue to happen. And it's certainly great to be a part of that in Maryland now. And my notes just disappeared. There they are. So Maryland, for those of you who have, probably even very little experience with Maryland, know that Maryland is a water state. It's the economy, livelihoods, homes, and communities of the state really depend on the Chesapeake Bay, the Potomac River, the Susquehanna River, and the literally thousands of tributaries of all of them. So when we talk about stormwater in Maryland, it's something that has a really granular impact. And I think it maybe makes it slightly easier than in some other states to make progress and convince and educate communities of the importance of stormwater, because there is no, stormwater does not take things away in Maryland, because you're always so close to the place that it would be taken away to. And for that reason, Maryland has really tried in many areas to be a leader in stormwater management and to think about how to marry its stormwater and wastewater and planning programs with some success and some struggles along the way. But yeah, so and if we had slides, I would have put up on the wall here. We have this great hydrologic map of the state in our office that shows all of the jurisdictional, whether it's county or state or federal streams and waters, and there's more blue than not blue on that map. So it is very front of mind for folks in the state. So as a result, we've really attempted to use all the tools in our toolbox, from the Chesapeake Bay Total Maximum Daily Load Program, our Bay Restoration Financing Program that I just mentioned, our MS4 program, and others, to ensure that stormwater is managed effectively. Our MS4 program holds local jurisdictions accountable for stormwater management within their boundaries, and we've set very ambitious targets for the county MS4s, and almost all of them are on track to or have already exceeded those targets, despite all of the initial grumbling that you would expect from the permittees along the way. And we've seen some really innovative and interesting approaches from the county stormwater programs and their officials. And so one of the things that we are looking forward to doing as we move forward and looking at the next rounds of MS4s and what are the next targets is to get everybody together, get industry together with the county folks, with our folks, potentially with you all, to look at where we can share best practices and think about how to do more with potentially less funding. Speaking of funding, we have an innovative Pay for Success program, which is leveraging public investments to accelerate green infrastructure and other projects through results-oriented contractual projects. We're putting more than $40 million this year alone of state funding into the program, which invests not just in Maryland, but in communities upstream of the, so Pennsylvania, New York, and other parts of our watersheds, but that achieve the lowest cost nutrient reductions, which really help us then take those dollars that we have and put them elsewhere on stormwater projects in other areas, and seeing a huge amount of success there. And Maryland gets to keep the credit for those nutrient reductions in the process. So it's another type of the market-based solutions that I know that we're all looking to work toward. So I'll also talk about our mitigation banking program. This is perhaps an area that is not as much of a success story for Maryland. We have quite outdated mitigation banking regs and eligibilities. And so one of the things that we are looking to is potentially upgrading and pulling back from the counties the delegation of authority in mitigation banking, where a lot of the counties, the building industry are all asking for the state to take control of that back, establish statewide standards and eligibilities, and really think about how we can make that program function as designed, and then to be innovative in the implementation of that to get the protections or to get the restoration efforts as close to the communities or the ecosystems that are being impacted by development as possible, and thinking about things like stormwater in the process, thinking about environmental justice, thinking about resilience and flood control and flood management. Just a few things that we're watching and our priorities moving forward. Of course, funding certainty is a key piece. All of the regs and our compliance work are only as good as the funding that local communities can cobble together with their own resources, with state resources, and with federal dollars, as well as the private sector. And that's why we need fully funded state revolving loan funds at a minimum to help communities plan and make progress. Another thing we're thinking about is the relationship between permitting and budget cycles, which are not always in sync. And I was excited to hear you talk about the long-term planning program and framework, and would love to follow up about how we can bring that more to our counties. Our general permits run on a 5-year cycle, but what we see and hear from most communities is that their budget development cycle is usually on a 6 to 10-year time frame. And I know I was part of any number of conversations with Chris over the last few years with folks who we're considering congressional authority to expand the time horizon for general permits. And I know I always had my perspective on that, but I'm very earnestly entertaining the feedback we're getting from counties that wants more flexibility to do that long-term planning so that they can go and raise the funds or secure long-term budgets to do that work as efficiently as possible. We see a huge opportunity in thinking more deeply about the intersection of flood resilience and water quality. How can we solve for water quality impairments caused by flooding? I similarly spent any number of conversations at EPA talking about what was a water quality issue, what was a water quantity issue. But in Maryland, it's just becoming increasingly clear that there really is barely a distinction between the two, and we have flooding events and stormwater events, which are more and more frequent. We see the water quality impacts of that from debris, from sediment, from nutrients. And so we want to think about how we can better look at the intersection of those, unlock funding for one, for the other, et cetera, within the confines of the authorities that we have, whether it's federal funding or state funding. And then finally, maintenance, as I mentioned, is something that we're looking at. It's partly the cost of success. We've made a lot of improvements and upgrades through our stormwater financing programs for the last 20 years. That means we have 20-year-old infrastructure and older. That is the new infrastructure already that needs to be, in some cases, just simply maintained, but in other cases, modernized yet again. And so when we think about, increasing targets for the MS4 programs, or when we think about where that Bay restoration funding program is going, we have to start thinking about those two streams. So some of that's going to new infrastructure or new upgrades, and some of it's going to simply maintain what we already have. So those are some of the dynamics that are shaping the state's work right now. There's many others, and happy to answer questions about those. And just thank you for the opportunity to be here and to work with these great folks as well.
Anybody have any questions for Zach? If not, I've got one to seed. Oh, there is one. Good.
Zach, you mentioned Maryland's pay for performance program, and it sounded like you were saying it was state funded. Actually, this might be a question for you, and it also might be a question for Michael. Do you perceive a need to maybe reconsider some of the federal funding policies around the federal funding programs to better enable their use to use pay per performance, P3s, those other kinds of procurement mechanisms that are not traditional, a municipality or, a utility building a capital project?
The short answer is I don't know. So Michael, I don't know if you, if you know, I know that we do receive, a not insignificant amount of funding through the Chesapeake Bay program, which goes across the Bay States into the most effective into EPA's most effective basin program, and so there is a sort of prioritization built into that already, but it's not the state decide using its own framework necessarily of it's not a P3 model, but it is trying to triage where the most need is and funnel those dollars there. But Michael, I don't know if you want to share any thoughts on that.
Yeah, certainly for the SRF program, pay performance might be difficult, but public-private partnerships or alternative delivery mechanisms are all eligible, potentially eligible, but again, very state specific. We have some states that are using it for design build type of things, and public-private partnership and the clean water, as long as the underlying assets are ultimately owned by a public entity, because under the Clean Water Act for non-point source type of projects, and we can do privates, but not utilities. The drinking water is different. So there are some innovative ones that happen out there, but it's probably, I'm not aware of any of them that are kind of driven to incentivize that type of thing. And yeah, I'm trying to think. I mean, I'm trying to figure out how that would work for again, the SRF pays for the infrastructure, right? So it's the delivery of the infrastructure. I'm just thinking off the top of my head here is clearly if there's a pay performance element of a contract with it to deliver construction of the infrastructure, and that's the performance you're doing. I don't see why they couldn't set something up a way which is, hey, if you deliver by 12 months, here's what happens. If it's delayed, there's a different structure, because the loan pays for the infrastructure, and if you get a reduction in the infrastructure cost because of the performance, for example, or I mean, it could not a reduction in the cost, but a reward to the constructor. It's interesting. Right? No, it is. No, it is. I'm very interested in trying to figure out how we can incentivize not just new uses of the fund, new ways of doing it. We talked. There's lots of uses of the SRF that are not just loans, loan guarantees, and all types of things like that. There's a lot of flexibility built into the program in 1987, which has not been utilized. So, but I always tell people it's demand driven, right? It's one thing to come and talk to me about it, but whatever state you're working in, you need to get the state engaged with it, and that can ensure that in Maryland you have an open door to all sorts of innovative things. So.
Thank you for the presentation, Zach. The target deadlines for the Chesapeake Bay Agreement are December of this year. And we understand that there is some work being done in the new agreement. Can you shed or give us some comments on what the future agreement will incorporate, and if there is any, you mentioned also flood resilience, any chance of that being integrated?
Not a lot I can say because it's all still very deliberative. Our governor chairs the executive committee right now, and I know that they're preparing to. There's a number of bodies nested within the leadership group there, and I know they're preparing to deliver recommendations to the executive committee. There's just still, I think, a lot of unknown in that process, and obviously with the change in administration, EPA is a party to the agreement, and so I think that there's just still conversations that haven't happened yet, as like Chris said, there hasn't been time, I think, to brief up on everything just yet, and so I think that we're still learning and still educating. I think one of the lessons I've learned just in the short time I've been at MDE, though, is the extent to which something my former EPA administrator, Michael Regan, used to say was that as we do more, we'll learn more, and as we learn more, we'll do more. And I think that that's one of the lessons that I'm seeing being applied in the Chesapeake Bay Agreement context, which is that, it's not that we failed to meet the goals. It's that, we know so much more about the daily loading. We know so much more about what's happening upstream. And so than we did when the first agreement was negotiated. And so, I think that by, looking at it framed against the original agreement, I think that, and what we knew at that time, it's still a success, but it's still, but it's that we know that there's so much more progress that can be made and should be made and where to make it now. And so that's what's going to inform the negotiations around the new agreement moving forward.
Yeah, I've got a quick, unless someone else has a question. Just real quickly, Zach, and I know that Chesapeake Bay is obviously critical to the state of Maryland, but the state that Maryland comprises a relatively small part of the whole watershed, right? So Pennsylvania and New York. Could you talk about engagement with upstream states on from your perspective to address Chesapeake Bay overall?
Sure. Well, there's 7 states and DC, 6 states in DC, and EPA are parties to the agreement. It's a big watershed. Maryland obviously has the lion's share of the actual coastline of the bay and is the downstream state. So we really value working with Pennsylvania and New York and as well as Virginia, the other downstream states as well. We're seeing a lot of fruit to projects like the ones I mentioned around Pay for Success, where the first round of Pay for Success funding had leadership from Pennsylvania and Maryland standing on the Maryland-Pennsylvania border together, celebrating Maryland making investments in Pennsylvania to achieve Maryland's part of its targets. And we're looking to do the same thing again. I think that there's innovative approaches out there that will get a lot of agreement among the states. There's obviously going to be tensions, in negotiations as well. But I think everybody understands sort of the importance of protecting the bay, and it's not just about protecting the bay. It's those improvements that are made upstream support those upstream communities too. So I think that's part of the narrative that everybody understands. And so there's a good relationship between the governors, certainly between all of the environmental agencies and agricultural agencies and others in our states. And so I would say it's a very collaborative approach at this point.
Minutes. Any other questions across the panel? And once, twice.
Hi. An additional question I have actually, this goes back to what Michael was talking about, where we're talking about I believe you said it was like $12 added to pay for stormwater, and then you ask yourself, what is this random fee that I'm seeing? What would you guys say would be, I guess, the best way to educate people on the importance of ultimately what we're talking about today? Because I think that's what seems to be like the common issue, is that there's not enough people that are aware of how important stormwater policy is. And I guess what would be a good way to get the people more proactive about it?
It's kind of the, what is it, $115 billion question, right? It's a great question. Chris or Michael, if you have thoughts too, please jump in. In a prior life, I led an infrastructure advocacy organization called United for Infrastructure that looked at, it was modally inclusive, and NLC is a member of the steering committee of that group now, and it was always very active, and so was NACO, because they understood that this is local governments are where the rubber meets the road, and also have the best relationships with everyday citizens and residents, and how to get them to understand what infrastructure is, whether it's stormwater, wastewater, drinking water, or transportation, energy, broadband, and that none of this just happens. It happens because people work really hard. It happens because people value it and decide at an individual level and at a leadership level in state houses and in Washington to prioritize that funding. And so I think that it takes getting many different perspectives involved and getting outside of just our space of where of course we know what it takes and why it's important and how much it costs and that we should do it, but it takes getting to all the untraditional suspects, all of the users of that infrastructure. When I worked in that space, we had, alongside all of the infrastructure faces, we had the National Restaurant Association and the National Retail Federation and the National Association of Manufacturers and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the AFL-CIO in lockstep with each other, that they couldn't agree that it was Monday, but they could agree in the value of infrastructure. and that the federal government should step in to invest more in it. And so I think that that's what it takes. And certainly, the data is clear. I know that the Value of Water campaign, which I know a lot of folks here are familiar with, has some great research on the economic impacts of investing in water infrastructure, including including stormwater infrastructure, and the job impacts, the indirect economic impacts are so powerful. And so I think it takes doing that research, getting that data, and then packaging it and getting it out to people, and highlighting when infrastructure, we don't want to wait for it to fail, but it does fail at times. And I've seen the propane tanks floating by in a stormwater event in my neighborhood in rural Maryland, or we've had our drinking water well infiltrated multiple times in the last couple years by stormwater events. And so, those all have a cost. And I think communicating to people, how much less they could be spending to recover from that is key to this. So, but I don't have the silver bullet answer either.
Can I add something? Sorry. If you'll bear with me for a story, I'm a Maryland native, and Zach mentioned the Bay restoration fee. There's 2 points I want to make about it. So when Maryland rolled out the Bay restoration fee, if you had a utility bill, so if you were hooked up to water and sewer, it showed up on your quarterly bill. If you were on septic, it showed up on your property tax. So where I grew up, my house, we were on well and septic, and my parents called me. I was out of the house by this time and said, "What is this fee that I'm seeing on my property bill for Bay restoration?" And I said, "Oh, this is for Bay cleanup." That was the end of the story. So to Zach's point, like growing up in Maryland, it is part of your ethos about the importance of the Bay. And when you look at strong stormwater programs across the country, I don't think it's an accident that it's Chesapeake Bay, Great Lakes, Puget Sound, New England, because that's part of who you are when you come from that state. I think the challenge for us, and this comes across in Pennsylvania, the Chesapeake Bay program, they don't touch Chesapeake Bay. So when you're trying to sell them on the importance of cleaning up the Chesapeake Bay, it doesn't necessarily resonate with them. So for us as an industry, we need to learn how to communicate differently with folks. Like, I think we've done a great job. Like, all of us understand what a watershed is. When you survey people on a watershed, they think it's an actual shed. They don't understand it's a geographic thing. And to Pat's point, people think that if there's a drain in the street, it's going to a wastewater treatment plant. So we need to really communicate in a different way to normal folks that aren't, talking about this every day like we are. So like our team who's sitting over here, they think a lot about how do we communicate in the way that resonates with folks, not just amongst us, that it's part of our professional, responsibility to know all this.
Yeah, so Elizabeth Krausel, I'm with Michael Baker International, and I just wanted to tie on to what you were saying is that when I meet people from Maryland, they learned about the Chesapeake Bay in elementary school. And that's like so important to start at an early age to understand the importance. But my question actually is for you, Chris. Since we're talking about the Chesapeake Bay, can you speak to the status of EPA developing similar regional TMDLs similar to the Chesapeake Bay? For example, will we ever try to develop a TMDL for the Mississippi River? And that would be great if we could start to educate people in the Mississippi River basin, which would be most of the U.S.
So fortunately, that's not my shop, so I don't have a lot to say about the status of that. But the TMDL development program, as with water quality standards, are really state-driven. We only step in when there is an objection to a TMDL, and we object to it, and then we have the responsibility to do it. We certainly think we certainly want there to be all the tools in the toolbox. For permits, what we have found is when there are strong state water quality standards, when there are TMDLs in place, it makes it easier for our program to write permits. And especially the TMDL model, when you've got the allocations out there, what's going to point sources, what is non-point source. Not only is it helpful for permitting, but it also drives those markets where you can have credit trading, where our point sources can look to ag to get some of the nutrient reductions that they need. So we certainly are supportive of it from our perspective on the permitting side of the house to help, actuate some of that, those processes.
I thank the panel and especially thank them because you all don't realize it is at least 10 degrees hotter up on this platform, which is why I've been thankful to sit back down there. But thank them all for sitting through the heat.
All right. Okay, we're getting close to the end, folks. I know you're all, thank you very much for all your perseverance today. And again, thank you to the panelists for all this excellent content, especially the last panel and the legal affairs panel. Those were great. So we're going to spend a moment or two here talking a little bit about our annual policy recommendations document that we develop every year jointly with NAMSA. WEF and NAMSA have been putting this document together for I don't know, like 6 or 7 years now, right? Something for quite a while. And we've had a lot of success from it. It really helps with our efforts to educate Congress about the important stormwater related policy, things that we feel are priorities for the sector. And, you know, we could point to a lot of the things we spoke about today, such as the OSG program, the Centers of Excellence, funding for the Clean Watershed Needs Survey. All were really products of this document over the last several years. So we've done a little bit of we do a little refresh every year with it. And it's a little bit of a process to do that refresh. So I do want to give a shout out to some of the people who really helped with that process again this year, and they've helped several years in the past. So just particularly, and Ralph said these names earlier because they also helped with coordinate this event today. But they're Scott Taylor, who wasn't able to join us today, but he would have been one of the people up here with us, and Seth is going to substitute in for him. But Pat Bradley, whom we just saw, Lori Larson-Pugh, Brandon Colts, Andy Sauer, who's going to join us, Jamie Hu, Elizabeth Krausel, Dave Smith, Seth, and Lisa Deason, and Ashley Voskel, my colleague at WEF. So thank you guys again for your help with putting this together again this year. So we're going to just kind of divide and conquer here on the 3 primary recommendations as you see them in the document. If you don't have the document, we could, there's more out on the front desk there. You can grab it on the way out. I'm going to talk a little bit about the first one, and then Andy and Seth will do the other 2. So this is kind of just the usual one we always have in the recommendations to Congress. And when folks go up to the Hill to meet, you know, you could talk about whatever you want to talk about, stormwater related. But if you're on the Hill this week and you're in a congressional office meeting, it's always, you know, they're hearing a lot of folks talking about money, funding for a lot of different things. So we always urge you to kind of take a minute to talk a little bit about stormwater funding needs. And we outline those needs here and the programs that can be, they can support to help communities address their funding needs. In the document. So, you know, the Clean Watershed Needs Survey that we've spoken about a bit now identified $115 billion over the next 20 years for stormwater related projects to remain in compliance with the Clean Water Act, as well as with additional expansion of programs to address development. That was a 385% increase over the 2012 survey. So that, as was noted before, the 2012 survey didn't really collect a lot of strong stormwater related data. So when we went through the process for this, when EPA went through the process for this 2022 survey, they were really able to get a lot more data and show really how much funding is needed out there. As well as at WEF, we do our annual MS4 needs survey, and roughly we find about annually, there's a funding gap of about $8.5 billion in communities for what they need to be funding for meeting their stormwater infrastructure needs, as well as versus what they have in funding. So that funding challenge is so significant. You know, the big program obviously is the Clean Water SRF. You find that the funding levels that go out for the Clean Water SRF for stormwater projects is only about 1.8% goes towards stormwater projects. So continuing to grow awareness in Congress as well as at the state and local levels about the SRF program being a program you can get funding for for stormwater infrastructure. Part of the challenge also is that only about 25% of MS4 permit holders have a stormwater utility, which is how you're going to essentially be able to borrow money through the SRF to fund your project. So continuing that growth of utility to develop a utility, and part of the SRF dollars can be used for planning. So if you're in a community that doesn't have utility and you want to do some planning, those SRF dollars can help you do that process to develop a utility. So then also the OSG program we spoke about before a bit. That's an important new program. It is underfunded. It only gets, like as mentioned, in FY25, it's going to get $41 million. It's eligible for $280 million. So asking for the full funding of that program is critical. The WIFIA program, which has been around for a few years now, and a great success. It does fund stormwater. It has a fair amount of projects that are stormwater related through WIFIA, funded through WIFIA. So those are loans, low interest loans. So encouraging continued congressional full funding for the WIFIA program is critical. The Centers of Excellence, the bottom two bullets there on the left side of the page, that's the new program that was also spoken about a bit earlier by Chris. Love to see that continuing to get funded at full funding level of $5 million for the Centers of Excellence grants. But also there's additional part of the authorization that was in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act to do for $10 million annually for planning and assistance grants. That has not received any of its funding yet. Honestly, between you and I, that's new funding. Congress probably isn't going to be putting new funding in their appropriations bills, but highlighting that part of the authorization of the Centers of Excellence provision within the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, I think is important when you do your congressional meetings, because we're going to be going back in 2 years and wanting reauthorization of the Centers of Excellence grants program. So we want to see that money eventually become available to communities to help with their planning and development, implementation of their stormwater programs at a local level. $10 million isn't going to get a long way, but it is money that will help with technical assistance and things like that. And then the other, obviously, there's a couple other bullet points here that, in the interest of time, I'm not going to kind of go into them. I'm going to give enough time to Andy here. But we do also, continue to want to see the Clean Watershed Needs Survey get funded. It is up for another round of funding here starting in FY26 because we want to get them to do the next round of the survey at EPA to get more data about what the national needs are for water infrastructure investments for compliance under the Clean Water Act. And so getting EPA that $5 million for the next round of the Clean Watershed Needs Survey is going to be important. So just I'll also point on the final things I'm going to point out here on the page is that you see that we do have some bullet points there about the Centers of Excellence. When you're in your meetings on the Hill to talk about some of the benefits that we have 3 bullet points there, those benefits that the Centers of Excellence will bring to both local and state and national efforts to promote better stormwater management and data collection and policy making. So just take a moment to look at those. And if you have any questions, you can grab me or grab anybody else with WEF or NAMSA afterwards, and we can talk a little bit more about them. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Andy, and thank you.
Advance the slide, or they're going to advance it? Okay. Well, hello, everybody. Andy Sauer with Burns McDonald. I get the pleasure of talking about item number 2. We actually had 2 items. We kind of stuck them together a little bit. We talked a lot about funding and how we can best approach this. And so as Steve was saying, we wanted to kind of give a refresh. So we talked a lot about as a group about, market-based kind of approaches. If you're like me and doing a lot of work with utilities, urban areas, how we fund these, how we can be creative. I think we need to think outside the box. I talk a lot about how we can get outside the box, and that starts with funding, whether that's pay for performance, that's a community type grants. I support the Kansas City program, their wet weather program. We've been trying to get a small grants program in place. Haven't been successful. But anyway, as Steve was saying, part of this is we're just trying to give kind of a basic fact sheet of how we can look at other types of funding sources, right? And why do we need to do this? We're all being asked to do more with less, right? And in this ask document to support market-based approach for, and I want to underline cost effective, because I really think when we think about stormwater, I've had some great examples here about how can we make stormwater projects be for quality, but also quantity. And that's a big step in stormwater management in my experience. We've typically done over here, we've done flood mitigation, and over here we've done water quality. And those aren't always cost effective when we try to put them together. So really, I think what we're trying to say under this ask document, or this number 2, is how can we be more cost effective? How can we be more innovative? And that starts with how do we fund these programs? And that's also kind of the why, right? We talked about this challenge of how do we explain why we need to do this? And it really comes down to me with really kind of 3 things. We need more integrated designs, okay? We need those solutions to address both quantity and quality. And the final thing is all of our communities are asking us to reinvest in these urban areas. We have these projects out there. We have to find a way to fund them. And this really gets down to that. I have the privilege right now working on a very innovative project in the oldest part of Kansas City, Missouri. It's actually where the stagecoaches left in 1850s. So you can imagine the infrastructure we have there. They've had severe flooding problems for the last 40 years. Nobody's been able to solve it because what have we been doing? We've been trying to solve it with one flood mitigation idea. This area is within the combined sewer system. Now we start to say we have a wet weather program, we have a flooding issue. Can I put those 2 funding sources together and start to solve the problem? It's only taken 40 years to get to that point. So hopefully with some of these documents, as this ask document and other things, we can be more innovative about how we look at these things. Fee in lieu of a trading program. I think we all need to be challenged to say, how can we do things different? How can we do it different in your state compared to my state? And so I don't think there's really a silver bullet in this list of items that are number 2, but it's really hopefully to get everybody thinking, let's think about how we can fund stormwater differently, more innovatively, more integrated, and then hopefully we'll have projects that will start to solve the mitigation, flood mitigation problem, and the water quality problem. So I had a lot of slides I gave to Steve. He didn't let me use any of them, so I had to use my hands. But anyway, I'll turn it over to Seth.
Okay, I'm Seth Brown. I'm the Executive Director for the National Municipal Stormwater Alliance, or NMSA. Did we move? No, we haven't yet. Okay. No, it's all right. I can click. All right. I'm going to talk about the last, we usually have 4 asks in our ask documents, but this year we have 3 because we combined a couple that Andy mentioned. And before I get going on that, I don't know how many folks have actually picked one of these up. They're over here in the lobby, and I'm really excited. I mean, it's a really helpful document. We have not really been engaged on the Hill the last couple of years. COVID happened, and then we just kind of lost some traction there. But we're going to be doing that this year. Actually, there's quite a few. I know there are other folks that are going to make some visits too. And it was amazing how quickly and how responsive all the offices were with that. The appropriations and the Environment and Public Works Committee and the Senate side and the House T&I. How responsive they were. So they want to hear, they want to get this input from us. So this is an opportunity for us to do this. And as Steve, wherever Steve, there's mentioned, we've really, we've not put a whole lot into this really. And we've gotten a lot of, relatively speaking, we've done what we can. That didn't sound good. Anyway, we're small and mighty was what I'm trying to say, and we've actually had a really good response, I think, and we've gotten a lot done. So it's well worth doing. So I'm going to move on to number 3 here, which is streamline the permitting process. And I'll just mention that, I've been monitoring the comments here, and there's still over 100 folks that are still participating, which is great. I appreciate that. But I've been, one of the comments that came up that said streamlining permitting is a dog whistle for more pollution. And I think some folks actually feel that way. Obviously, at least one person does, and others do too. That's not what we're talking about here. I just want to be clear about that right now. That's not at all what we're talking about here. Because this is a time for change. So why don't we lean into this and find true efficiencies, right? The MS4 program has been around for 30 plus years. And by the way, you see that I'm wearing a tie, Chris? Chris always wears a tie. He's the best dressed man in stormwater. So I'm wearing a tie to try to keep up. I don't have the fancy socks though, I'll get there. Next year. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Where was I? Okay. So, yeah, we haven't made major changes or really any significant changes in the MS4 program for 30 plus years. And I think you can kind of think of the MS4 program in some ways as like an operating system, like Windows 95. And then we've had additions and changes and things pile up over time, you know, and more provisions, more requirements. Are we asking the question, are they good requirements? Are they good additional, you know, provisions? So this is a time to reflect on that. And I think, you know, Chris, you made the good point about, you know, the e-reporting rule coming up. That's a requirement at the end of this calendar year, that we have to do all of our reporting in the stormwater sector electronically. And that's an opportunity for us to maybe think about what other ways can we find efficiency such as that. So that's what we're talking about here. That it's, you know, we have to think about things like, I mean, like the San Francisco ruling, right? It's obviously tough to do this. It's easy to talk about it in a kind of a general way, but we need to roll up our sleeves and find efficiencies here. And maybe it's time for MS4 2.0. That's really what we're talking about here. We have to start the conversation. So that's what we're talking about here. So again, if you're going to the Hill, hopefully several folks here are going to be going to the Hill. That's what we're talking about, and you've heard all the input. And if you have any questions about any of this, grab us at the happy hour that we're going to be having at 5:30. Again, thanks to Atkins Realis for that. And I'm Scott Taylor. I'm not really Scott Taylor, but I'm playing the part of Scott Taylor. He never wears a tie, and he's very California, which I'm not. So you can tell I'm not Scott Taylor, but he was the one who helped us get that sponsorship. So I appreciate that on his behalf. So I'm going to move forward to the next. Can I do that now? All right. So I'm going to talk about some quick updates from my organization, and then Lisa Deese is going to talk about the Water Environment Federation. So without further ado, I'm going to move forward on that real quickly. So I'm going to talk about some of our initiatives, activities, and programs just to keep folks updated on what we're doing. Obviously, we're engaged with policy and advocacy. I'm not going to go through this whole list, but we're here. This is one of the big things that we do, and we really value our partnership with WEF, which are great partners, and of course NLC and NACO, and all of you here with us. We've heard about the Clean Watershed Needs Survey. It's something that we supported, and I know other organizations did as well, and we saw great results from that. So again, being engaged does drive results, and we're going to continue to do that and deepen all of that. Of course, we're involved with comment letters. There was MSGP, which I just submitted, but then I didn't. They just extended it again. So anyway, so it was good to get that done. But anyway, Waters of the U.S. is coming up, but there's other things that go beyond rulemaking, such as the reporting rules. That's really important. Trash-free waters. We've been involved with that program for a long time. So that's the kind of stuff we've been involved with. Also, we established National Stormwater Day. I guess it seems like a bit of hubris that we just said, well, it's November 16th, and then that's the day. But we did that. It's also, I'll just mention, this is, I'm sorry, Chris, it should be just you and me. You should be up here talking, right? I know. But Chris refers to this as National Button Day, correct? Yeah. And the reason for that is that when you go and actually make something a national day of something, there's only 365 days, right? There's only so many things, so many days out there. And actually, National Button Day is November 16th. That's a true thing. So, I mean, we have to fight hard against the zipper and Velcro lobbies. I always have to bring that up, but I think we're making traction. So I think we're going to lean into it and create buttons that say Stormwater is groovy on that. So we can lean into that. Anyway, yeah, Stormwater is groovy. I don't know. Yeah, you're right. Anyway, so we've been go to Stormwater Day or stormwater.day. You can get information. This really celebrates all the awareness efforts across the country for stormwater. I know, Susie, you talked about how do we get more folks to pay for stormwater. I think raising awareness. That's what we have to do, and that's what we're trying to do. When we always have a free webinar. And we've had 500 the first time, 300 the second time. Hopefully it doesn't continue to go down. But anyway, we always have a couple hundred folks that show up, and we're just trying to celebrate stormwater, really, and the folks who are doing all the hard work and raise awareness on why it's important to do this. So this year, unfortunately, because November 16th is a Sunday, and I don't think we're going to get a lot of traction on a Sunday for stormwater. So it's going to be November 17th this year for our webinar. So heads up on that. I think that's right. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's right. Anyway, so we do other webinars. I mentioned the National Stormwater Day is one of our webinars. We do many others. We just did one like I guess the end of February. Dave Smith moderated that for us on Supreme Court and other rulings out there. We do more and more of these every year. So that's something that we're trying to get out to the community on all sorts of topics. There's just some that are listed there. We also have started providing bulk trainings, online trainings that are more cost effective for communities. We're trying to help, small and mid-sized communities especially get more updated technical training. So that's what that's about. So check that out. There's a link there if you want to get more information on that. We have a newsletter that's growing. We have over 2,200 subscribers for that. It's supposed to come out the third Wednesday of the month. It just depends on how often that really happens. But we're trying to do this monthly. We haven't been as timely in the past, but we're trying to make that happen. Anyway, we're trying to do as much as we can to keep the short and focus just specifically on the stormwater sector and the MS4 sector. So if you want to subscribe, there's a QR code there, something to be aware of as well. We've been involved with the StormCon. I don't know how many folks have gone to this, but this has been it's the longest running national stormwater conference out there. And once again, we're going to be playing a big role there. We have a full day of content, similar to what we're talking about here, funding. We have our testing program I'll talk about in a second, but we provide the national perspective on various topics that you don't get often at conferences. So that's what we're involved with. So it's going to be in Orlando this year, the end of August. Come join us for that. And you can also, if you're a NAMSA member, you get a 15% discount, which is not a bad deal. We also do reports, and I know, by the way, I'm going to point this out. This is what happens when you do slides at 2 in the morning. I put in the Water Reuse Foundation. That doesn't exist, right? It's the Water Research Foundation. I know that, Shannon. I'm saying that so you don't correct me later over happy hour, which you should, and I would expect that and hope that would happen. Anyway, so we're working on stormwater capture and use because we really need to raise awareness on stormwater reuse or stormwater capture and use. There's so much potential. Shannon Spurlock is here representing the Pacific Institute. Did a great report on the total potential for stormwater reuse across the country. And this ties in with one of our main mission areas, which is looking at ways to drive stormwater as a resource and awareness for that as well. So check out that report. We're also working on, based upon those findings, some more practical case studies and ways in looking at regulations. Dave Smith is working on this as well. Various aspects of increasing and realizing the potential on stormwater capture and use. So something else to check out. We have our CBP3, or Community-Based Public-Private Partnership Center of Excellence. We're involved with work in Washington State. We got some folks from Washington here, trying to drive more of these market-based and innovative approaches, working with a bunch of small and mid-sized communities in the state of Washington. And hopefully this can be something that's replicated elsewhere across the country. So we'll be reporting out on how this kind of finalizes over the next year or two. I did want to mention our most active program, which is STEP, Stormwater Testing and Evaluation of Products and Practices. You can think of this, if you don't know about what this is about, it's a consumer reports for stormwater. It's a way to do testing and evaluation of different types of stormwater infrastructure. And we're basically standing on the shoulder of giants. So Washington's got a field testing program that evaluates different types of technologies and practices in the stormwater sector, and New Jersey has a lab-based program. While those programs are continuing, but we are working to leverage those into a national framework. And the big news there is that a year ago, we actually had our first launch focusing on evaluation of trash capture technologies, and now we are adding to that hydrodynamic separators. And by the end of this year, we will be adding cartridge filters. So we are growing, we are active. We've got multiple applications going through right now. We hopefully will have our first verification in about a month or two. But the point is that it's growing and it's active and it's a real thing. And we're moving forward on the field testing side, again, working with the great folks in Washington on that side. So if you want to learn more about that, go to stormwatertesting.org. And if you want to learn more about membership, we're trying to get more and more members all the time. So there's a QR code there. I'm not going to go over all this right now. So there's our contact information. And then Lisa, if you're ready to do your spiel, cool. Yep.
Thank you, Seth. Hey, everybody. So yes, I'm Lisa Deason. I am with the Water Environment Federation. I've been with WEF now for a little over 2 years, and I manage the stormwater and collection systems programs. Prior to that, I was the stormwater manager for my local municipality, along with the floodplain administrator, the land, future land use planning, historic preservation. Does that sound familiar? You know, and as we talk about this, not just funding, MS4 needs are very critical. You know, the standards for MS4 programs, stormwater management, every community is different. And we talk about, yes, of course it rolls downhill, it flows downhill. You know, I live in Alabama. Come on, you know what that looks like. But you know, I think it's kind of funny because we have made it a little more complicated, and I was blocked by the column earlier, so I wasn't sure who was discussing how do we go about doing this. I mean, what do we do about stormwater? Well, we can stop being so complicated, for one, because you know, it started out as the Clean Water Act. And then it went to NPDES for short, the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. And, you know, talk about getting the look. What is that, right? And then we went to MS4, Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System, right? So now we have an MS4 plus an S, which is the MS4 Needs Assessment Survey. So, and I'm so glad to see everybody in this room so y'all can help me with this. I'm coming to you for help today. So we've had, and I'm not going to skip through these. I don't want to embarrass anybody, but I'll just pride Michigan on theirs. Out of the 533 responses that we've received this year, they were responsible for like 112, I think. So Alabama has 8. So here's the our biggest thing is that the MS4 Needs Assessment Survey. Why is it different from the Clean Watershed Needs Survey? Well, the Clean Watershed Needs Survey is put out by the regulator. The MS4 survey is put out by several professionals and nonprofits who coordinate together, such as the stormwater community with WEF, who's run by volunteers, and it gives a different. We're not the ones that are regulating, asking the questions, basically. And this information is very critical to, you know, it contributed to us being able to get the centers of excellence. So funding is, you know, this is what helped write the stormwater recommendations. And so we also, if you noticed, the infrastructure report card got a big fat D, and that data comes from the MS4 Needs Assessment Survey under the Association of, I just know the acronym, ASCE. What is it? Thank you. That's exactly right. I had that conversation earlier, but my goodness, you know, the acronyms, they kill me. And WEF has a lot too, okay? And I kid about that, but I'm just going to be upfront and honest. When I was first became the stormwater manager, I went to a Alabama Department of Environmental Management conference, and I was to give a presentation on the status of stormwater management in our community. And literally, when I walked into our municipality, it was all about acronyms. So I wrote a song about acronyms, and I got up there and I sang it, okay? And it was, you know, it had a good beat to it, and it was pronouncing all the acronyms. So I'm going to do that again one day, because now that I have this other, no. Anyway, I'm trying to be funny, but in all seriousness, we only have about 533 since I left home on when I left work on Friday. How about that? I haven't checked it today, but we had 643 usable responses back in the 2022 survey, which is the 2023 is the report out. So now we are into 2025, the year that we are to be reporting out. So I'm carrying this over. I keep saying, if you have landed here on this survey page, that means that we have temporarily extended the deadline. And I won't give a deadline, because if you give a deadline, then they'll say, oh, I missed the deadline. Darn, I couldn't participate. It's literally 41 questions, take probably 15 minutes. And you can just use the QR code. Oh, not that one. That's the last year's report. I just wanted to provide that. Which button do I push? Anyone? Anyone I want to? There we go. Okay. So I just kind of gave an overview of who the responses came from. And that QR code is to the survey. Share it with your colleagues, share it with your network, share it with your municipalities, share it with anybody that you know that has any involvement in stormwater, because we need these municipalities, counties, DOT, all non-traditional. We need all of them to respond to the survey, as I said before. And I'll go ahead and just throw myself under the bus along with some other folks. You know, how do you do this? I almost called, EPA and said, hey, can you just give me all of your MS4 program managers and their email addresses? Because I really need this information. But, there's stormwater associations at the state level, and then you have other programs. You've got, your regional programs. In my area, it's ALOIS. We came up with another acronym, but that stands for Auburn University, Lee County, Opelika, and Smith Station, Alabama. And so I've depended on them to sort of get the word out and help us to get responses on the MS4. But if you could share it, and I wanted to kind of highlight, like I said, one of them, which I was 132. So Michigan, all they did was write a letter or an email to their state regulator and say, hey, can you send this out to your MS4 permit holders? And guess what? We got 132. Some others have done it and hasn't made a difference at all. So, I mean, we're into, at this point, sort of a survey overkill. So, and with Seth was talking, I'm thinking, maybe we need a stormwater clearinghouse at the, international level or something. Everybody's doing something with stormwater and we still can't figure it out, right? So anyway, if you are interested, I'll do a little bit of what Seth was doing. If you are interested in joining stormwater and having an impact and wanting to make a difference, students and young professionals, we really need, we need young people who understand stormwater and who want to go into stormwater. And I understand that engineering, they don't focus as much on stormwater and as they do other aspects of infrastructure and things. And so that's something that we really need to push. And as far as what some of our great volunteers do at WEF, we are putting on, and our partners such as NAMSA, we are working on several webcasts, all webcasts that WEF provides, even through our volunteer hard work. Those are free of charge. You do not have to be a WEF member. And so I would encourage you to please go to LinkedIn and follow Stormwater and Watersheds. That is the WEF programs that we promote everything under that LinkedIn page. And right there is where you'll find all the information that we'll be, sharing in the near future. We are also commenting on the multi-sector general permit, as well as the waters of the United States. And so y'all will be getting those comments soon. And anyway, something else coming up is we've got a collection systems and stormwater conference. If you love hot weather, it will be in Houston, Texas, July 15th through 18th. And yeah, so, but lots of things. Stormwater management is a critical component of WEF's work around the circular water economy. I don't want to get a lot into that, but circular water, everything water has a circularity component that drives it. And so that's where we are right now. And we're trying to improve the way we manage it, improve the way we use it. And therefore we are depending on a lot of volunteers and members to help us carry out that messaging and make a difference. And the one thing that I wanted to mention too is that we have green infrastructure and the STEP program. So the green infrastructure program at WEF, that group, along with the NAMSA STEP program, we will have I believe it's in August is when we changed it to, I think is the month. And then a webcast for that. And then also we will have a webcast on 9/11/2025 about resilience. What a day to have a resilience webcast. So just be on the lookout for information, like I said, on the LinkedIn page. If you're a WEF member, of course, you have WEF Unity. And I put my business card out here on this table, because if you want to get involved in stormwater or collection systems and conveyance, then I'm your person. So I appreciate everybody being here. I've had a great time. I did sit out there for a while. I wear many hats. Receptionist if I need to, caterer if I have to, and a bathroom patrol, whatever I need to do. I'm glad to do it. And then one other item I specifically wanted to mention is this is accesswater.org. It's where we store all of our publications, web publications, and in partnership with, as it was then, was the Stormwater Institute. A lot of volunteers, a lot of programs, put a lot of effort into rainfall to results. So I just wanted to share that with you. If you would like to go download it, it's free of charge. Like I said, go to accesswater.org or follow the QR code and pull that. It's got some really great information in it. I think we kind of labeled it to be, it was updated year before last, I think. But it's so critical. All the information that's in there is not outdated. So take a look at that. I think you'll really find it interesting and helpful. And I'm going to say I think that's all of it. Except, okay, I did write this down. I was thinking about it earlier. So my former boss, and this was when I was at the municipality, and maybe people get confused, but he said, you love stormwater. And I'm like, no, I don't. I'd like to figure out how to manage it. You know, that's the purpose, right? It's managing it and using it if we can, right? There are creative ways to use all water. But he gets up in front of this huge group of people. There's some event at the city, and he gets up, but you had to know him because he's very comical. He's no longer with us, but he gets up there and he says, I want y'all to meet Lisa Deason. She's in charge of stormwater for the city. And she loves stormwater more than I love my wife. And I'm thinking, so maybe that's the confusion. You know, it's not that we love stormwater, but it's an asset and it's a problem. So I think teaching that at the local level, sharing our knowledge and getting people on board, students and young professionals, students even in high school, they don't know what stormwater is. You know, stormwater is just water. It's just stormy outside, so we have stormwater. So there are a lot of challenges. And I think if we get back to being a little more simple, I think we could make a difference in a different way than we are now, but in a better way. And that's all I have. Thank y'all so much. Enjoyed it.
All right. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, everyone. I've been nominated to stand before you and your commute home or back to your family. What? There. Yeah, I was going to sing that acronym song. So I'll be brief. Again, Jamie Wool from the University of New Hampshire Stormwater Center. I'm also vice chair of NAMSA and vice chair of WEF, Stormwater Committee. So I just want to thank everybody, in particular the National Association of Counties, National League of Cities for hosting us, Water Environment Federation, National Municipal Stormwater Alliance. How's that for a list of acronyms that I just rattled off? And so channeling my inner Scott Taylor, I wanted to leave you with just some key findings from the day. Joseph Kane from the Brookings Institution started us off talking about this gap this rather large gap that exists between the needs and the money available. And really that summarizes exactly why we're here. We're here to help bridge that gap and find ways to improve funding. We also heard from Ed Higgins and Tim Petty about the congressional things that are going on right now. And they said Congress is not the point of the spear, that actually highlighting grassroots and outreach efforts that help really bring this message home is going to be important. That was also underscored by a lot of the presentations today, that talking about the states' roles and the importance of the states' roles, especially in light of, some of the federal uncertainty. So we're going to have to really, states' roles are going to take more precedent, I think, moving forward. We heard spicy takes on legal cases. I'm not going to sit here and try to reiterate, but there's a lot going on, right? Chevron deference, Loper Bright. We have residual designation. The New England alone has 2 active RDA permits and 4 under consideration right now. We heard federal and state updates from Chris Kloss and Michael Dean and Zach Schaefer, that the centers of excellence are not dead. That's great. They're moving forward. Hopefully, the Clean Water Needs Survey has a 365% increase in the stormwater needs. And that's not even including any of the NPS needs as well, which there's a bit of an overlap, I think. We heard Clean Water Needs State Revolving Fund. There's lots of eligibility and potential funding opportunities out there. And I think I wanted to end with Zach Schaefer's quote. He said, "As we do more, we learn more. As we learn more, we do more." So I think that's a great way to wrap this up. Reception. I think Seth already left. He's probably already there. It's about a 12-minute walk. You see a map right here, very close. So please join us with at the reception at the Wundergarten, hosted by Atkins Realis. Thank you. All right, that concludes it. Thank you, everyone.